A heavy aura fell upon a bright, full moon night, where many spears and weapons were pointed at the sky, and soldiers shouted to progress onwards and kill a supposed devil. A man darted forward and surprised the soldiers with his actions, but this male was faster and swiftly killed off the soldiers in front of him. People cried out in pain as blood spilled onto the man's face, as he kneeled down with a hand to the ground, as he seemed to start to summon something from the ground that sprouted from the cracks with a purple glow, surprising the soldiers before they would get killed by the multiple purple tentacles that came out of the ground. The man breathed heavily from the exhaustion of the moment, holding himself up by his blade, while giant red eyes floated above his body. The purple-eyed male had beads of sweat falling down his face, before he would try to get up and glance around him, quickly noticing someone walking toward him. This person asked him why he made the choice of bargaining with the devil, as the red-haired girl asked the man why he betrayed them. He didn't answer, and so the girl insisted that he would, referring to the male as Knox von Lienhabe. Knox hummed in thought and repeated the question in surprise, chuckling and agreeing that it would seem that way from where the girl stood, but he believed it was the opposite. She said that was a lie and asked again why he dealt with the devil and ended up this way, making him turn around to start his story. It all started with a crash landing. A screen would pop up where a man in his apartment would stare at the screen after finishing his 27th run of a video game. He had picked up items and cleared achievements, and everything seemed good, aside from the hospital visit that he had due the next month. 2 years ago, the man received results from the doctor that changed his life greatly. He would try to go to another hospital to see if there were any changes, but this facility had unfortunately ended up with the same conclusion, and could only offer drugs to sate his pain. However, this did not ease the despair he felt from the whole situation. The bottle of pills that he was given dropped and spilled to the ground, his arms slumping as he thought about how the news was 2 years ago. His lifeless eyes glanced over at the bags of trash before he started to cough up blood, realizing that he was dying for real. He wiped off the blood and dismissed his thoughts, as thinking about it won't change anything, and he was interrupted by a notification on his phone. When it was checked, it was only a reminder about the male's appointment, and in this previous world, his name was Chan Yu. Chan unlocked his phone and saw that all of his notifications were only from the hospital, and no one else, since it seemed as though people stopped reaching out to him once he started to lose his memory. He wondered where he would even go in the state that he was in, lifting his phone to remember the pamphlets he was given by the doctor about support groups and such. The male slammed his hand down on the desk and crumpled up the papers, throwing them off, while hanging his head low, before Chan raised his head and stared at the computer monitor in front of him. The game was asking if he wanted to start a new game, and he felt as though this game was all that was left for him. He clicked yes and typed in some name while holding a weak smile, wondering what kind of character he should make this time. Chan picked many different traits until a warning screen told him that selecting more than one genius trait would give him a penalty trait. He glanced at it and saw that it gave him a life-limiting illness trait if he continued. This caused him to flinch, as that trait was just like him, making Chan laugh, before going with it and clicking yes. Suddenly something buzzed, and the male seemed to tumble over while his vision became blurry. He wondered if he was dying at that moment, glancing at the screen while thinking about how he had hoped he could at least choose the time and way to die. The character he had chosen had its name modified, and it started to count up in percentage before he would feel a breeze of wind, heaving for breath as he sat up with confusion. The male looked around his surroundings and felt a sense of déjà vu, realizing what was going on as he got out of bed and looked at a window, as he learned that he had become the worst spoiled character in the game he played. And that was when the phrase popped into his head about how it really all started with a crash landing. The Lienhabe family was one of the 3 prominent families, harnessing the element of darkness, and had a close link to the most diabolical crime organization in the game, with the Knox being the youngest of the 5 sons. The family earned a reputation for being the finest of swordsmen, but Knox seemed to have been an exception, and was deemed mediocre. However, he would soon make a deal with the devil, and become the worst scourge known to the universe. The male wondered if he was dreaming, until a window popped up with his stats, causing him to see that he had some awful stats in some places and had a lot of negative traits. He remembered that these were the traits of the character he customized, and this character only had 1 year left to live, similar to a situation in real life. Chan wondered why he made this character, but deep down, he knew that it was because he wanted a character who was like him, dying with no one to lean on. Back then, he had no idea what tragedy that would lead to, but his thoughts were interrupted by a message that he opened with confusion. It greeted him and referred to him by both of his names, surprising him with the fact that it knew his real name given by his parents, whom he didn't even know if they were alive. Knox wondered if whoever brought him to this world knew of his past that he couldn't remember, but the message continued, and said that it had been a long time without him, causing more confusion, as it said that he had proved himself deserving to come back to this world the past 2 years. It welcomed him back, and Knox stood there, wondering if he had originally come from this world. Nox was struggling to figure out the issue, wondering if this game world was real and the one he came from was not. His body trembled and the message continued, saying there was a lot to tell that couldn't be told now. However, this mysterious person intended to help Nox. The message told Nox to enter the academy and find companions who could be of help, so he could get as close to the main storyline as possible, in order to set Nox on his path to finding all the lost truths. The window faded away and Nox panicked, but it was too late and he decided to think about everything. He was now Nox von Lienhabe, the will-be final boss of the game, and now he was supposed to push himself close to the main story, but he was hesitant about the idea. The light-haired male wondered if the message was really telling the truth, and if he could afford to ignore it while burning his bridge to his lost memories. With that risk in mind, Nox knew that he couldn't refuse it, as he needed to reclaim his memories and figure out his connection with this world while trying to survive. After all, he was living on borrowed time, so being the ultimate villain was a price he was willing to pay. He grinned and thought that this wasn't worse than the life he had in the other world, since he didn't even have his memories before the diagnosis of 2 years ago. During those 2 years, he had always been a dying man waiting as the clock ticked by. But now he was in different surroundings that were extremely familiar to him. Nox asked the system for the date, and he saw that he had 1 year left till the next enrollment cycle. But that was also the time of his demise. However, he was still excited to start his 28th run of this game. He opened the doors of his bedroom only to feel a pain in his wrist, which caused him to halt, as a window popped up to say that he had sprained his wrist somehow. Nox walked down the halls while confused about what was wrong with his body, before bumping into a maid who fell and dropped all the plates she was holding. The servants all gasped as they realized it was Nox who walked out. The male was still in pain from his sprain, but he noticed the maid looked familiar, and recognized the long-haired girl as Lona. Lona apologized for what she did, and begged to not be cut with splinters, but the male was more focused on remembering the girl as one of the less important side characters who was memorable from the fact that she would talk behind Nox's back. Right now, this girl had tears and doe eyes, which Nox imagined sparkling with joy while she would backbite. He leaned down and said that he would let her off the hook, but glared at her as a warning for her to not make the same mistake, which she squeaked at. The male didn't believe he was being that scary, but he glanced over at all the other scared servants and remembered that he was playing as the spoiled wretch of a character. Lona asked where Nox was heading so early in the morning, to which he responded quickly and explained that he was heading to the drill hall, surprising the servants. Nox decided to ask the maid to come along, which made her worried that he was going to beat her with a wooden sword. They walked out down the halls and she kept glancing at the male, while he thought about surviving, since that near-death experience made it clear that he was just not ready to die, and the first step to take was to adapt to everything as soon as possible. He muttered to himself, which confused the girl, as Nox thought about how he had beaten the game 27 times, and knew every hidden aspect, opening the traits panel. The main story of the inner lunatic unfolded against a backdrop of conflicts, but that alone would not have earned the game its popularity. What made it special was the countless combinations of traits that enabled thousands of navigation paths, and these traits belonged to different tiers, but players could only choose one genius trait. This wasn't a surprise to Nox. However, he had gotten 2 traits thanks to the game's penalty system to allow players to choose more than one in exchange for disadvantages. Either way, Nox now had a sword-fighting trait to expedite his progress, and sensitivity to mana to help his efficiency in magic activity. He hummed and thought, as he also had benefits such as the ability to peek into the stats of other characters, the ability to be a convincing actor to people, and a heart of steel to center himself in combat. The only problems were his negative traits, with his illness on top of the one that gave him 1 year to live, but it was a whole collection of them. He had a trait where it would prevent him to step into cold terrain without heat-inducing skills, and a trait that would make him likely to collapse every chapter. But it is what it is, as he could just tackle them one by one. Lona wondered if Nox was actually going to drill himself, but she glanced at his face, which held a soft yet determined expression, surprising her, as he opened the doors and was going to start off his progress by tackling his curse of frailty. The wooden sword was pointed at the ceiling, as Nox thought about it from all different angles. Mostly the fact that his situation made him as screwed as the stranded protagonist of a sci-fi novel. Nox threw the sword away and fell to the ground while panting heavily, since he didn't know how intense this curse would be. Time passed and he finally got up from the ground to look at the well-kept swords. But this was to be expected from the swordsmanship that defined the family, and the sobriquets that the family had earned, one of them being the Sons of Darkness and Swords. What afforded them such renown was a man called the Vanquisher, who is also called the Black Blade of Domination. This sword had been passed down through history, but that shouldn't concern Nox, since there were perks other than swordsmanship that the family had to offer, such as money. And the money. The Lienhabes were some of the highest nobles in the world, which meant they had plenty of money to burn, enough to not have to worry about the family black sheep's splurging habit. He was certain that Nox's father, Tᴇʀᴜ, wouldn't care if his son spent money without a care in the world. But this was expected since Nox had always been the spoiled one, so there was an upside to this character. Nox was going to go on that spree, until he realized how weak his body felt, making him wonder if he should just wait until Lona got him the things he asked for. Minutes ago, the maid girl provided him with a sword, towel, and some water. The girl wondered if the male was actually going to train, but her thoughts were interrupted by Nox asking her to come forward, making her worried that she would be beaten. He frowned and sweat dropped before pulling her close, and whispering something in her ear which surprised the long-haired maid, as they were items that would cost him a fortune, along with being completely useless. Nox asked if she was back-talking, which made her scared, and she walked off dejectedly, while Nox wondered how resourceful the maid could be. But now was the time to wait until the items would arrive. The male went to get a drink and sighed at his low stamina, but he was interrupted by someone suddenly greeting him. That man was Rodwell Dᴇʀᴜs, the head steward who held much authority in the manor and directly assisted his father. So Nox likely didn't stand a chance against this man who stood as an obstacle. Nox put down the mug and activated his actor trait to joke about how it was the head steward's job to attend the head of the family. But Rodwell mentioned in order that Nox's father expected Nox to be at the dinner table that night. This worried Nox, as he didn't know too much about Nox's character and what the family was like, so he tried to refuse, but Rodwell insisted, and said that the male would be joined by Thalia von Steelleiner, a girl training to be a knight. If Nox didn't attend, Nox's father would be furious, so the male decided to accept, but this surprised the steward, as he mentioned that Nox was unlike himself that day. This was because Nox never enjoyed wielding a sword but is now in the drill hall, asking what Nox's inspiration was. However, the male told Rodwell that he wouldn't tolerate such questions, as the things he did were not of the steward's concern. The older male gulped nervously and affirmed with a bow as Nox left, but Rodwell felt something suspicious, and decided he would let Tᴇʀᴜ know. Nox felt panicked with this new event, and wondered what would happen if he were busted, but the main thing on his mind was the girl he didn't expect to pop up so early. The dinner occurred, and Nox sat there in silence, while his brothers, more specifically the twins of the brothers, made fun of him for coming to the dinner, continuing to talk amongst themselves. Even if it wasn't his idea to do it, the words still stung. But the moment was interrupted by the father entering the room, the head of the family along with Thalia, who greeted everyone happily. She was there to receive training, and the father told everyone to give her a cordial welcome. Thalia, the red-haired heroine who would put an end to Nox's corruption. In other words, she would be the one stabbing him in the heart. Nox's father mentioned his surprise for him coming to the dinner, making him turn away with a dejected expression which confused Thalia. The dinner started and Nox started to eat, while the twins would glance at the boy. They spoke up and said that the academy enrollment was next year, saying that the family needed to soon determine who would be worthy of representing the family name. Tᴇʀᴜ hummed and thought and agreed, as Nox remembered that this academy was the most important place in the game, since it was the place where students would handle incidents at school and fight the demon. This was also the school he must get into and gather companions. To which the father continued, and explained that the academy took its own measures to prevent nobles from forming cliques, hence the policy of only accepting 3 students from each household. The 2 eldest had already claimed their spots, so this meant only one of the 3 sons left would get a chance. For now, Nox needed to focus on getting chosen for that spot, and Tᴇʀᴜ explained that the one chosen would be chosen with their Lienhabe method, which Nox immediately knew was by dueling. The father was surprised that Nox knew, and mentioned that they would take place in a month in the drill hall, to which the twins snickered and suggested that the boy shouldn't join, especially with his delicate body. Nox started to speak, and said that he would definitely join, as he was optimistic knowing his rivals, causing the twins to feel offended. But Nox explained that he was suggesting that he was above them rather than equal with them, while the twins sat with angry expressions, and Thalia seemed to giggle and ask why Nox was so confident. Nox felt a chill through his body, as she was the last person whose attention he should be grabbing. When the dinner ended and Rodwell made his report, Tᴇʀᴜ agreed that Nox seemed to have changed overnight, which was already ridiculous of a situation. He wondered what triggered the sudden change of heart, and believed it could be a demon, but that was quickly dismissed. However, what was happening was certainly more interesting than he expected. Tᴇʀᴜ asked Rodwell to keep an eye on Nox, and it seemed as though the boy continued his drill and was running around the manor. The maids were all surprised, but also confused by the fact that he was just running, considering he was dueling with swords in a month. Nox wondered why he could hear their whispering, but was interrupted by the system telling him that his stamina increased by 0.1 points. This was a very low number, but it was important since stamina was a major obstacle in his plan, and his genius trait could only be activated once he had at least 4 stamina points, making him sad that he didn't get it from the beginning due to his frailty. He panted heavily while thinking about how he needed to increase it by 1.9 points within a month, feeling burdened by this curse that halved one's stamina gains. All his running resulted in just 0.1 points, and even his illness trait halved the growth as well. so he needed to work 4 times as hard. Another problem was that he would also be limited to 15 points max, but that's a worry for another time. Finally, Lona had come to bring the items he ordered the previous day, impressing Nox, as he looked at the items and believed they would help expedite his progress, since he knew what they did as a person who had beaten the game 27 times before. He took the items and Lona asked what they were for, looking worriedly since they were mostly dangerous. Nox agreed but said they were only dangerous to those without knowledge, making her confused, as he grabbed the bottle of poison and started to drink it. The maid girl panicked and explained it was poison, which Nox knew, but this was the type of poison that would give him a temporary stamina bonus of 50%, even if it would kill him in 10 minutes. Lona watched and was about to call someone until he refused since he wasn't done, proceeding to eat the golem nucleus, which made her even more panicked, since it would petrify his body. However, the 2 items together activated a hidden effect as planned. The nucleus was normally used to maximize defense or bring an artificial golem to life, but when used with the venom, it would neutralize the poison and eliminate his curse of frailty. One negative trait was now gone, but Lona was still panicking and asked if he was alright, only to witness the exhausted boy starting to take his shirt off, which confused her even more. Nox started to take off his shirt, which made Lona blush furiously, as she watched him grab the other vial and pour the spring water on his body, which neutralized the certification of the golem's nucleus. The spring water and nucleus started to react with one another, and it was a weirdly pleasant sensation for the boy, as another hidden effect activated, giving him a temporary blessing of growth, which would give him a stamina growth bonus until his stamina would reach 5 points. The final touch was the scroll that was left on the cart, which Nox picked up and casually ripped, making his stamina growth rate double. Now the purple-eyed boy had broken the curse of frailty, and took these other measures that would make his new stamina growth rate twice that of average characters now. He was feeling proud of himself and clenched his fist, until he was tackled by the maid who burst into tears and asked if he was alright, since seeing him take off his shirt made her think that he had lost his mind under the influence of the venom. She started to stop until he would tell her to just get a towel for him, but he stopped himself when he looked back at her face, and felt as though he couldn't yell at Lona when he was feeling so good about breaking the curse. He told the girl that he was quite alright, but she still wondered if he needed a certain person to check on him, or possibly just needed some rest. However, the light-haired boy explained that he had some things to do, which confused the maid, until Nox said that it was running that he had to do. The sun shined brightly, and Nox could be seen running around the courtyard with Lona close behind him with a towel, while someone watched from afar, muttering to herself about what possessed Nox to accept a duel with his brothers when Nox himself was not physically fit enough in her eyes. Talia was reprimanded by her handmaiden, Emma, who told her that her way of talking was not right when it came to a member of the family hosting her. Talia didn't really care about what she said about the family, and continued complaining about how all Nox did was run, and how it didn't seem like he had the intention to train with a sword, and heard that onagers tried to teach him but were turned down. The red-haired woman believed that he would get beaten, however, it still couldn't leave her mind, so despite her handmaiden's confusion, she decided to leave shortly. Talia walked up to Nox and greeted him, but he was internally confused as to why she was out there with him, so he decided to act cold and ask what her business was. She winced from his attitude, and came up with the belief that he was only like that because he was stunned by her beauty, asking the boy if he honestly believed that he could beat his brothers, even though Talia complained that he was only doing running, which Lona agreed with. She offered her help, but the boy immediately refused and told her to leave, which shocked her, asking if this was how he treated people who offered him help. Lona panicked in the background, since she believed this was not how he should be talking to ladies. Talia scoffed and walked off, confusing the boy about what happened, and Nox felt as though everything was spiraling out of control. He checked her stats and saw how talented she was from her stats, including the fact that her stamina was higher than the average number for men in the world. Even so, she was not on the level of the 3 Supremes or 4 Sages, but she could still claim a place beneath their league, and she would be capable of killing a few devils. Her element was fire, and once awakened, would be upgraded to white fire, which would give her the power to burn corrupt Nox into oblivion. With that in mind, winning Talia over as a friend was not an option, as he didn't know how much that would mess with the story. He just needs to find a way to survive while complying with the storyline, as after all, it was nonsensical to fraternize with your future vanquisher. 1 month later, Talia walked down the hall, and remembered how some people were impressed at how she truly had talent befitting the reputation of the Steelliner family. She didn't really feel that way though, as she felt lower than her sister, clenching the hilt of her blade at the thought of losing to that woman. Talia wondered if she would ever be good enough to be a knight. Knights must be able to lead a frugal existence void of greed, and from time to time, sacrifice themselves for justice. Along with that, they must also master countless swords and forms. The red-haired girl sighed, and thought that Nox believed that running was enough to defeat his brothers, thinking he stood no chance. The next day, the sun shone on the 2 brothers who stood in the drill hall, with everyone, including Scylla, Theodore's wife, watching. Theodore asked Rodwell how he believed the match would go, and the steward wasn't too sure. An announcer explained what the duel was for and quickly started the fight, to which Knox's brother immediately raised his blade. When Knox's father asked Rodwell's predictions, the steward explained that years of training for Alan would put that man in the commanding position, which the father agreed. The wife glared, and Rodwell wondered if Theodore was predicting a different outcome. It was true that Knox had changed. However, he didn't believe that Knox would overpower Alan unless there was an outrageous circumstance. In Rodwell's previous days as a knight by Lord Leonhaber's side, the art of swords was governed by a simple rule, where achievement was calibrated with how much time one spent with their sword. The only factor that would change this was talent from the realms beyond, an overwhelming natural gift. But he didn't believe that Knox possessed such a gift. Theodore spoke and said it would be unwise to dismiss other possibilities, and that for all they knew, any of the sons could possess a gift comparable to the three supremes. Knox thought about how unlucky he was even in this current world that he was in, remembering how his luck was supposed to be high considering it was at 7 points. After all that running, the light-haired boy had failed to bring his stamina up to 4 points. With his blessing of growth, Knox was at 3.8 the previous day, and was almost there to reach his goal. However, Lona was still running behind him and asked if he was absolutely sure that he needed her to run with him. The male affirmed, and let his true intentions slip that he wanted her to suffer with him. But he told the girl that she had one more article to clean, which made her pout, to which he mentioned his notice of. Knox chuckled and wondered if all the running gave her stamina as well, checking her stats and finding out that she had a number which was higher than the average man. After all the hard work he had put in, he was still weaker than a side character. Lona mentioned that the sun was about to set, and reminded him of his duel the next day, making him pant heavily and feel disappointed that he didn't have enough time. When it was the next day just before the match, Alan called out to Knox, and suggested that he should withdraw, calling Knox a disgrace to the family. Knox chuckled at the attitude, and knew that his brother wanted to beat him, to which Alan agreed since he wanted to impress Thalia. The light-haired boy glanced up at the girl before checking Alan's stamina, making Knox frown at the sight of the high number. He felt worried before the announcer called out to both men, and said that they couldn't challenge the outcome of the duel. But this only made Knox even more worried, since losing would mean the end of his journey already, and cost him the opportunity to find out who sent the message and what life was beyond his 1-year deadline. He clenched the sword as the duel began, and Alan immediately made the first move, which Knox rolled out of the way of, grunting as he skidded back and trembled by the power of the second attack. Alan laughed and continued clashing blades with Knox, who wondered what he should do, until suddenly the system said that his stamina increased, causing him to grin and murmur under his breath. Alan was confused and made fun of it, before continuing to send blows at the younger boy, as Theodore's wife scoffed at the sight, believing that one of her other sons would attend the academy. As the duel continued, Theodore called the sight pathetic, making the woman grin, as Theodore said they may have put too high of expectations. Rodwell suggested to interrupt the duel for Knox's sake, while Theodore thought about how Alan and Hats were talented, even if they weren't as talented as their eldest brother. He wondered if he had to accept that none of his sons had the temperament to overpower all and put the world under his heel. Knox wheezed, and Theodore sighed before rising from his chair with the intention to stop the duel. But it finally happened, and Knox could feel the power coursing through his body after the trait activated. Alan asked if his brother lost it, but Knox activated a new skill, which seemed to slow down time. A wise person Knox didn't remember the name of once said that a genius and an average man experienced time differently, and that was what Knox was feeling at that moment. Everything was moving slowly, and even if that didn't automatically make his sword control perfect, he was no longer dormant in his traits. With a raise of the sword, the duel was settled, and Alan's sword was knocked out of his hands, making the older male flinch from the sudden movement, and the fact the victory was now obvious. The sword fell to the ground and Alan held his hand with a glare, while Knox looked down with a cold expression. But Knox knew this wasn't the end of the duel yet. He knew that the skill's effect only lasted 5 minutes, so he wondered how to wrap things up. With a confident tone, he told his brother that he was being leisurely in pace, and he would put a swift end to everything, wanting them to come at him all at once. Knox turned to his father and asked for permission to engage both of his brothers simultaneously, and Theodore stared with surprise, while Thalia wondered what had gotten into the boy. The father hummed and thought, since his curiosity was piqued, allowing it, despite Silo's remarks. The duel would proceed, and the twins grabbed their swords while Knox held a grin, watching as his brothers would dash forward. However, Knox was standing his guard as well. Alan told Hats to corner the male, but Hats told the other to shut up. Knox's hidden effect activated again, and the boy knew what to do to block every attack, sliding past them while slamming against their shoulders. Thalia stared with a mouth agape, and Knox knew what everyone was thinking, about how he was the disgrace of the family yet was overpowering 2 of his brothers. The twins glanced at each other, but Knox told them to not take their eyes off their opponent, stepping forward before swinging his blade around. Another frenzy of attacks occurred, and Nox was starting to feel as though the burden of survival didn't stop him from having genuine fun with sword fighting. Everyone stared with shock and the twins grunted, shouting about how the situation was impossible. Within seconds, both Alan and Hats were sent to the ground, and they stared up with bewildered and incredulous expressions, knowing that they had finally lost the match. This was also when the system had let Nox know that his time of a genius effect had run out. Nox turned to the announcer and said that he believed the duel was concluded, to which the announcer confirmed with a wince and a stutter. The winner was Nox, and the twin brothers cursed under their breaths, their bodies shaking, as their arms slumped to the ground with their weapons falling to the floor. The blades thudded against the bricks, and Theodore grinned at his youngest son, who smiled back with an exhausted expression. He bowed before the audience and thanked them, before stepping toward the exit. However, Tᴇʀᴜ rushed toward the boy and believed this was her chance to talk to Nox, darting in front of him. The sun was starting to set, and Nox was coughing and heaving, realizing that drops of blood were coming out of his mouth. This confused him, but he realized it was because he had exceeded the time limit, since it seemed as though the effect had a colossal downside, which was if he used it for more than 5 minutes, it triggered a debuff. That debuff was the fact that his lifespan had decreased by 2 days and 17 hours. Eroding his days and making him weaker was the worst kind of debuff he could sustain at the moment, and now he had less than a year to complete his goals. Luckily, the counteraction didn't manifest in the hall, as people would have started to question if he was fit enough to go to school. A voice called out to Nox, and he turned around to see Tᴇʀᴜ looking worried and asking if he was hurt, wondering if he got injured mid-duel, which caused him to frown and curse under his breath. He felt panicked and alarmed that Tᴇʀᴜ of all people had to come to him and get in his business, especially since her telling Theodore about these counteractions would only bring things downhill. Nox tried to say something only to get interrupted by the girl, wondering if he had defeated the brothers in such a condition, confusing him by the question, as the blushing girl felt embarrassed and guilty for misjudging him. Tᴇʀᴜ thought about how she had been observing him for a month, and had not once seen him train himself with a real sword, and all that she heard was that Nox had swung a wooden sword a few times in his first day of training, making her wonder how he managed to defeat his brothers. This made her believe that Nox had been hiding his natural talent, so she ran out of the drill hall and wanted to know what he did. However, after the duel, she witnessed the lone boy with blood dripping from his mouth, and his body seeming as though it was going to collapse from exhaustion. Tᴇʀᴜ wondered if it really wasn't Nox defeating his brothers with overwhelming strength, starting to think the rumors that she heard were more misleading. He wiped his chin while the red-haired girl looked at the boy, and believed that he was a hard-working swordsman who toiled for his victory. She stared at Nox and flinched when he coughed, causing her to walk closer and ask if he was alright. Suddenly, he slapped her hand away, and glared coldly, while saying that she wouldn't lay a finger on his body. He thought about how the 2 years he had spent doing nothing but playing video games had made him unable to really socialize with other people, along with the fact that it didn't help that she was his future killer. Tᴇʀᴜ fidgeted with her hands, and said that she just wanted to express her apologies, confusing him, as she admitted that she had severely underestimated his skills, since she had heard that he had been delicate since birth. She now believed that he must have had his reasons for directing his efforts towards endurance, apologizing once again, and knowing that anyone could make such mistakes, such as the tales she had heard of his rampages. Nox wondered how he should even respond to that, and noticed how the girl was just as unassuming as she was in the game, which was surprising, since she was still a duke's daughter. He turned away and said that she could do him a favor by not telling a soul about the bleeding she had witnessed, to which she affirmed without hesitation, making him step away without any more worry. However, this would not be the last he would see of her. Time passed, and Theodore felt as though his sense of foreboding was grounded, asking Rodwell what he thought of Nox. The steward couldn't fathom the reasons for staying so passive at first, but he believed Nox had attained a stage that none of his brothers had in his age. The father had the same opinion, yet had a suspicion that they had only just seen a fraction of his abilities, so he wanted Rodwell to continue keeping an eye on the boy. Rodwell agreed, and Theodore wondered if it was possible for Nox to be a talent worthy of inheriting the Vanquisher. He clenched his fist, and told Rodwell that the report would be of the greatest importance, since Theodore seemed to not have much time left, to which the steward bowed and said he would do his best. Night arrived and Nox got the notification that he had completed a tutorial quest, but it didn't really seem like a game to him anymore, despite the features that remained. His reward for winning was to receive 3 attribute points, making him sigh at the fact that he had spent a whole month just to add 2 points. Despite that, he looked at his stats and wondered what to add them to. He decided that he would add them all to luck, and the simple reason was that when playing the game, luck was more important than ever, so he might as well test the improvement right away. The system also mentioned that there were benefits available, such as the fact that he could get 1 random skill scroll and conjure 1 skill, making him excited at this, as he immediately summoned the dispenser, which was a bit weird to see in the flesh. Nox turned the switch, and hoped he would get a normal grade scroll since his luck was higher. Remembering what the scroll colors were as he gulped nervously, a ball fell out of the dispenser and opened up, glowing brightly, until it was revealed to be a gold scroll, exciting him as he opened it immediately. He proceeded to use the skill conjurer and knew which one to conjure in order to help with collecting the hidden treasures from the manor, and that skill would prove indispensable. Soon Tᴇʀᴜ would call his sons together, so this skill conjuring could wait for now. The scroll showed that he had received a skill that gave people with lower points a 20% debuff against him, making him remember why he loved the game. Nox glanced over at the other window, and remembered that Gᴇɪl, the second eldest son, would be returning to the manor soon, since his graduation was a good while ago, and he would be returning from night training. Right now, Nox would prioritize resting, and he believed that Tᴇʀᴜ wouldn't cause him problems anymore since she wouldn't break her promise, making the boy think that she would have no other reason to come at him. The next day, Nox was quickly proven wrong, as he immediately saw the girl walk up to him. He asked what she wanted, and she mumbled something incomprehensible, confusing him, as she repeated and asked if he could teach her how to progress as fast as he did. Tᴇʀᴜ wanted to make fast progress like Nox did, so she asked for the boy to teach her how he got to where he was. Nox sweat dropped before walking past her, and asking if she really hadn't uncovered the secret after a whole month of peeping, making her face flush in embarrassment as she tried to deny the accusation. She ran after him and begged him to have a duel with her, or at least consider sharing his methods with her, causing the purple-eyed boy to remember that Tᴇʀᴜ craved the approval of her sister, so she was likely doing the same with Nox due to his presentation from earlier. He decided to turn around while putting up an act, telling her that, before asking what the method was or what training it would require, she should think of the strengths she possesses. Nox paused for a moment as he didn't know what to say after that, but he also told the red-haired girl to stop drawing comparisons between herself and others. The boy quickly rushed off without another word, leaving the stunned girl alone with a blush on her face, as she wondered if that was all he could tell her. As Nox left the building, he let out a breath of relief and looked behind him, hoping that the girl was not following him, as there was no need to have Tᴇʀᴜ next to him as he would proceed to get his hands on a hidden treasure, that treasure being the treasure of the Lienhaba Manor, where his father and other siblings waited for his arrival. Nox felt bewildered when he first saw the Lienhaba family horse farm for the first time in person, believing the words he would hear about it being one of the 3 best farms on the continent. Rodwell bowed to Tᴇʀᴜ, and the father told everyone that they were called together so they could choose a horse as a lifelong companion, making Nox gulp at the fact that the time had finally come. Of all animals, horses held the most sacred place in the tradition of the Lienhaba family and the continent, since anyone who wished to be a knight or magician must acquire a horse at an early age, and form a bond that would last their whole lives. There's even a course on horsemanship at the academy, and cavalry warfare would become more common as the game progressed, along with taking good care of it, as it also saved on the costs of transportation, which made it indispensable. This makes all the more reason to pick the right horse, to which his father spoke up and said that Nox would get the first pick as the winner of the duel, and only had one chance, and watched as Nox walked off, making Tᴇʀᴜ hum in thought while wondering if his son possessed good discernment. The horses neighed, and Nox was surprised by how stellar a lot of these horses were. However, there was a specific horse he was looking for, his eyes browsing around before it landed on a black and gray horse that had its rib cage showing. The boy walked toward it and chose it without hesitation, surprising his twin brothers, while Tᴇʀᴜ held a frown. He suggested that Nox should reflect upon his choice, causing Nox to look surprised, but he expected such a reaction since most would think that he just made a stupid choice. Despite that, using his perceptive eye ability made him see the stats of the horse, and also see how it was a high grade. The grade of pets can go up tiers over time, usually only by 1, which meant that this horse would become a prime grade horse or even better once it was fully grown. Aside from that, the horse was also an obsidian horse, which was one of the rarest horse breeds in the game, due to its strength and beauty. The boy knew that Tᴇʀᴜ would likely have taken the horse if he knew what breed it was, but for now it may look frail due to all the debuffs, along with the negative trait that would cause it to die within a couple of days. That trait may even be worse than his life-limiting illness, but he stood by his choice, since he knew how to stop this negative trait from becoming a problem. Tᴇʀᴜ wondered why Nox chose that horse, believing that it was likely that he saw too much of himself in the horse, and to let his emotions carry him away. His father told Nox that he hoped the boy wouldn't end up regretting his choice. The man walked off, which surprised the twins along with Nox, who saw how disappointed Tᴇʀᴜ must have been by the decision. Rodwell walked up to the boy and reminded him about the fact the horse still needed a name. The gray horse rubbed its face against Nox's hand, and the light-haired boy looked down, before kneeling and deciding to name it Carl, the name that he had always used from the other world when playing the game. It was a name that had much meaning to the boy. And where did Carl end up? Nox's bedroom. The boy hummed in thought, while knowing that he shouldn't let anyone else see what he was going to do, so keeping the horse in his room was the right choice. He noticed the horse staring into his eyes, and it seemed as though it was trying to tell him that it couldn't give up on its life, making them quite alike in the feeling of struggling to hold on to what little chance a person had with life. Nox called out to Lona, whom he knew was outside the door, making her tumble in after he started to threaten her. She was surprised that he knew, but he called it obvious before dismissing the situation and telling the maid girl that she was taking care of the horse from today. The long-haired girl pouted and looked off with an upset expression, since she was the one who made the bed, but Nox decided to ignore it and just mention how the horse was ill and needed gentle care. The exhausted state of Carl made Lona worry about it, making Nox remember that what he was going to do later with the horse would be quite frightening to others, and wondered if Lona could handle it. 3 days later, a scream rang through Nox's bedroom, as Lona let the boy know that Carl was dead, to which Nox sighed at the sight, since he expected the horse's death the entire time, but it was reasonable for Lona to be sad since she cared for him. Either way, this was bound to happen, and Nox knew that keeping Carl alive was never an option. Nox told the girl to stop crying as she was breaking his concentration, but she was confused by this, until he explained that Carl would come back to their side very soon. Lona was even more confused and wondered if Carl's passing addled his mind, causing the boy to sigh and tell her to step back. The light-haired boy took out a scroll and unraveled it, setting it on the ground and beginning to pour magic energy into it. It flashed brightly as Lona stared with shock, wondering if he was doing something with his magical energy despite it being illegal. He was starting to lose control due to the distractions, so Nox shouted at her and asked if she wanted to see Carl die a second time. If not, he wanted her to be silent, to which she complied, as Nox needed the ability to concentrate since he couldn't handle his mana yet, and his ultra-sensitivity to mana trait was still inactive. Along with that, the Empire's law dictated that only royals were allowed to make use of their magical energy before they would turn 15 years old. This gives royals a head start in the practice of magic, and generally they end up achieving significantly more in the study. Because of that, since Nox wasn't a royal, all he could do was pour out all the magical energy he could muster up. Nox could feel his hands start to throb, and wondered if this was truly how it felt to use magical power, grinning as he proceeded to use his one-time skill, Conjure. He knew that there was no room for mistakes, since he was about to use black magic, a book being held by a skeleton hand flashing in front of him. The system told the boy that he could now summon Carl back to the world as an undead pet, asking if he wanted to proceed, which he did without hesitation. A glow formed around the horse, who laid in front of the open book, while Nox remembered that the undead in the game were defined by their two shared features, the first being that they were brought back with black magic and darkness-type magical energy. The second feature was that even if they had died before, they would still have consciousness, and even upgraded strengths, including their loyalty to their masters. There was still a catch, since there was only one family that possessed the might to create such beings, that being the Marbus family, who were renowned for harnessing the darkness element. They were similar to the Lienhabers, but instead of knights, they were black magicians. Nox wondered if the characters outside of the family had a chance of using these skills, and the answer would be no unless one had the Necronomicon, the Book of the Dead, which was what he summoned the skill for. Dark hands started to sprout from the ground and wrap around Carl, while a black liquid dripped from Nox's mouth, causing worry within Lona, who watched with shock, but he told her to be quiet, as he still had a bit more time to put energy in. He grunted in exhaustion and started to cough up more blood, making him realize he had run out of magical energy. But fortunately, it had all worked out, as he looked up at the horse who had just gotten back up and neighed loudly. Nox had succeeded, and he stared at Carl, who had returned as an undead pet, noticing the gleam in its eyes as he panted heavily from both the exhaustion and the excitement that he did something right. Lona still had tears in her eyes from the worry, and watched Nox get back up and call out to Carl, who walked forward to the boy. He looked at the stats of the gray horse and was content with the fact that he'd removed the negative trait, and even gotten some upgrades just as expected, telling the horse that he was now its master from now on. Carl seemed to let out a sound of contentment as Nox pet it, and both the boy and the horse were surprised when Lona suddenly hugged them both, confusing Nox, as she started to sob from all the worry she had while watching him cough up blood, and how she was already worried for Carl. The horse scoffed and turned away from Lona, causing offense, since she had taken care of the horse the entire time. She argued with the horse, while Nox thought about his next plan, which was his quest for the hidden treasure of the manor. A few days later, Nox had seemed to leave his bedroom in the night, and stepped past the stables in order to gain access to what seemed to be a forest. He held a few items in his hands, and realized that the paths were not much different from when he was playing from the other world, feeling relieved as he put them away and thought about the second hidden treasure that lay within the forest. If he failed to find it, he would not survive, as it would be the key to impeding the progression of the life-limiting illness trait. Something rustled in the bushes, causing Nox to be alert, but he quickly dismissed it as he felt he was just on edge. However, he couldn't help it, as this was not just a game anymore. The boy glanced at the wooden sign that warned people to not enter, as the forest of lost children would cause people to get lost and die. Nox entered the forest and was told by the system that failing to defeat this stage would result in his death. The leaves breezed in the wind while the light-haired boy walked through the grass. Remembering the details about this forest and how it was strictly out of bounds for everyone due to the pitch darkness and thick fog raining over it, which would make even the most skilled people get lost. It was a perfectly descriptive name, since anyone would be good as lost the moment they stepped into the forest. But it must be noted that it is a forest of lost children. It means that adult characters won't receive any reward even if they cleared out all the monsters inhabiting the forest, as if the monsters don't already grow several times more ferocious towards adults, something that Nox had to experience the hard way when playing the game. In that sense, the difficulty level of the forest was 2.5 stars at the very least out of 5. When he was playing from the other world, Nox didn't care what the reward item was, but now it was exactly what a dying man needed. He stepped even further through the forest and took out a torch, lighting it up and staring at the bright flame. The key to making it through the forest was observing which direction the smoke flowed, and once a person would get certain, they must walk in the opposite direction. Nox was going to do so until he decided to focus on something else first, calling out to the person who was hiding in the bushes. Silence filled the area as they didn't answer, and the boy sighed as he pulled out his blade, slicing through the bushes before a scream rang through the forest. Before this moment, Tᴇʀᴜ was stunned that Nox had not fallen for her beauty, confused about the situation, as Emma tried to beg the red-haired girl to stop following Nox around, as she was worried that she would end up bearing the blame. But Tᴇʀᴜ had no worry of that happening. Later in the night, Emma would walk through the halls, thinking worriedly about the girl since she still had talents just like her sister. Emma sighed before checking in on the red-haired girl, only to walk into an empty room, immediately filling the handmaiden with confusion and panic, before she realized what likely happened and awakened everyone in the house. The leaves continued to breeze as Tᴇʀᴜ sat there with an embarrassed expression, while Nox stared dumbfounded. She greeted him and was about to explain why she was there, until he heard a rustle which caused him to pull the girl behind him, as something came out of the bushes. That something being a gray wolf. Tᴇʀᴜ was surprised that such a forest near the manor was inhabited by gray wolves. Gulping nervously at the fact that she didn't have a proper weapon to fend for herself, it growled and walked near them before starting to howl, likely calling for reinforcements. More howls were heard and this gray wolf growled, before Nox would grin, dashing forward to slash the monster in the chest. Another slash to the neck and the wolf fell to the ground dead, while the girl stared with bewilderment, turning to face the boy who now had blood on his clothes and face. The boy asked once more why she was pursuing him, which made Tᴇʀᴜ blush and make up an obvious lie. But Nox had no time for lies and threatened to leave her if she wasn't truthful. The girl was shocked by the answer and grabbed Nox's wrist as she started to ramble on, not necessarily lying, but not getting to the point either. Nox sighed to himself and realized that Tᴇʀᴜ was overestimating his abilities, along with the surprising fact that she held no bad feelings toward him. He was also surprised by the fact that the girl was clueless enough to tail someone in the middle of the night, but he decided to let her follow him, as he couldn't leave a main character behind in the forest. However, Nox wanted to be clear and told her that he wasn't helping her, as he was just preventing discord between their families and keeping her alive. Tᴇʀᴜ felt bad, and Nox hoped she learned her lesson. But the girl continued speaking and wanted to thank the boy, surprising him, until the moment was interrupted by the other wolves walking up to them and growling loudly, starting to surround the two. The two stood there with the torch still in Nox's hand, and a chill ran down Talia's body, until she was pushed away by Nox, who told her to stay away, giving her the torch while telling her that she would otherwise obstruct his sword if she got involved. Things were going unexpectedly, so Nox needed to focus, as this forest was one of the prologue stages and wasn't part of the main storyline. There couldn't be a stage boss, so that was one less worry at least, but there would still be an elite monster just one tier below, and that elite monster would likely be an elite gray wolf. The wolves continued to growl before dashing forward, as Nox knew that knowing the identity wouldn't make things easier. He slashed at the incoming wolves and felt as though he was always finding himself on the edge of a precipice, watching as another wolf would try to lunge at him from above. It was time to drop all hubris and face it like he used to from the other world, clenching his sword tightly as he tried to remember the mantra. Once he remembered it, he slashed through more of the wolves and sighed in relief, while Tᴇʀᴜ stared with an expression of awe, believing that Nox was not exerting himself to the utmost, and wondering if the boy had hunted a wolf before. The words that Nox had told her had echoed through her mind, making her think that Nox believed her swordsmanship wasn't good. The wolves continued to howl, and Nox waited in place, since he knew what was coming, hearing the grass rustle as a larger animal started to walk out into the open. The elite gray wolf. Back at the manor, the servants were all outside with torches looking for Tᴇʀᴜ, but they found footsteps that led to the forest, which likely belonged to Nox and Tᴇʀᴜ. This had caused great fear to course through the servants, since they knew the horrors of the forest, causing Emma to collapse with worry, as she believed they should follow them. Rodwell immediately interrupted and said they couldn't, confusing the handmaiden, as he explained that it was a forest that even the reincarnates family failed to vanquish. To the reincarnates family, the forest represented nothing but shame, as admitting that an entire forest remained unexplored within the manor would be as good as publicly announcing they were incompetent. The fact is still unknown to the reincarnates that only children who hadn't come of age could claim full success in the forest, so Rodwell wondered why Nox entered the forest, as he looked at the footsteps and noticed there were signs of caution, and a lack of being manipulated or kidnapped, meaning Nox made the conscious decision to walk into the forest. He clenched his fists, and could no longer deny that Nox indeed had a change of heart, and his former self was no more. So he told the others that there was only one way for the return, that being that Nox would find the way back to the manor. Emma still had tears in her eyes, as everyone heard the howls of the wolves, causing even more fear, as she believed that she had let Tᴇʀᴜ walk off to her demise. The red-haired girl seemed to pull out the dagger she had on her ankle, and Nox glanced over. Noticing that fear didn't break her concentration, he reminded her to stay out, and just save her strength and run as soon as they got attacked. Nox knew that fighting an elite Grey Wolf didn't call for a life or death conversation, but he just wanted the girl to stay alert, and was glad she was staying vigilant. However, he couldn't trust her with the rear guard just yet. Because of that, Nox activated his skill to slow down time, with the intention of taking down the elite wolf with a single blow. It seemed to scoff, and Nox stared with surprise as it seemed to stoop low, making Nox realize what it was about to do. During that time, the other wolves darted forward to attack, but they were easily dealt with by Nox until they suddenly halted, confusing him, until he saw the elite wolf get up and growl. Multiple wolves dashed and hopped toward the boy, and he would try to focus on some but couldn't slash at all four of them at once, so one of them got behind Nox and growled as it attacked. The light-haired boy turned around only to witness the wolf get stabbed in the throat by a dagger that he realized was from Tᴇʀᴜ, who told the boy to be alert, to which he glanced over and noticed the red-haired girl in the trees. She knew that she was told to flee, but she didn't feel as though she could do that, surprising the boy with the fact that Tᴇʀᴜ was helping him. Tᴇʀᴜ shouted out to the light-haired boy, asking if he was alright, and hoping that he wasn't hurt considering he was almost attacked by one of the wolves. Nox was surprised at the sight that the red-haired girl was possibly helping him, but his thoughts were interrupted by the sound of growling, making him turn around in surprise before slashing away another two wolves. He reassured the girl that he was fine, making her sigh in relief, but he thought that he must have looked pathetic. Nox sighed before realizing that his body was trembling, signaling that the counteraction from using his skills too long was happening already. It was frustrating, since it was the most important at this very moment considering something started to rise from the ground, that being the elite wolf. The purple-eyed boy grinned while clenching the hilt of his sword, before watching the elite wolf prowling around him. Suddenly it charged forward, surprising Nox when it dashed past the light-haired boy and back into the forest, which confused him greatly. Silence filled the area as the boy tried to figure out what happened, until he heard rustling, but it was too late when he turned around, as the elite wolf dashed past him while bringing a gash to his side. Tᴇʀᴜ looked worried while calling out to Nox, watching as the wolf continued its trek back into the forest, to leave the boy in silence once again as he gripped at his shoulder. He grit his teeth and felt as though the rating of the forest was wrong, even though it was the rating of his own mind. But it was reasonable, since real-life experiences were different than playing video games. The boy scanned his surroundings frantically. Silence continued to fill the area, as Nox thought about how the monster was orchestrating attacks with its minions, and was now just using its surroundings. Hearing the leaves rustle before it zoomed toward him again, Nox found where it was and immediately threw a big swing at the monster. However, the wolf halted in place, to prevent Nox from getting a hit in on the monster at all. This surprised him as the growling canine finally charged once again. While the light-haired boy realized, the wolf was waiting for him to take a big swing in order to expose his weak point. His hands clasped the sword and his teeth grit, while he grunted until blood started to drip down his mouth, causing him to feel frustrated. The wolf leapt at him, and it seemed as though everything slowed down, and Nox's life flashed before his eyes. Thinking about how he had beaten this game several times, yet he was stupid enough to let himself get overconfident during such a time and situation like this. Nox wondered if he was stupid enough to believe that he could do anything, knowing this wasn't the way he imagined he would die. The boy clenched his eyes shut, getting ready for a second death, but it seemed as though that never happened. A sound was heard, and the surprised boy opened his eyes to see the yelping canine with a dagger in its eye, making him realize that his having weak points to reveal meant that the elite Grey Wolf also had weak points to reveal. Along with that, The only person who could reveal such weak points in the wolf was not him. Nox clenched his sword and shouted a battle cry, before plunging the blade through the wolf's gut, the blood spilling everywhere until it collapsed to the ground. The boy had also fallen to the ground due to the fact that he was already exhausted from the counteractions of his skills, so he wheezed while Tᴇʀᴜ would shout in worry, since the other minions were still alive. Despite that, her worries seemed to die down slightly, since one glance at the rest of the wolves would have her realize that they were whimpering and backing away. The red-haired girl jumped down from the trees and ran up to the boy, asking if he was alright. He reassured her and wiped away the blood dripping from his mouth, about to tell her that he owed her big time. But his words were interrupted when he realized he was thanking an enemy, and the one who was going to kill him in the future. Nox turned away and reassured her once again, but in a colder way, since he was still injured by the gash of the elite wolf. The boy had risen from his position and said that it was a superficial wound, bringing some relief to the girl, until she turned her head to notice a spider crawling on her shoulder. The sight of the arachnid brought a chill down the girl's spine and caused her to scream, confusing the boy as he turned around and wondered if there were more monsters. However, he was interrupted by the girl tackling and clutching onto his body in tears, which confused him even more. Tᴇʀᴜ shivered and mumbled to both herself and Nox about the fact that there was a spider, glancing at it once again before screaming once more and causing the boy to stagger. Nox sighed and chuckled at the fact that the red-haired girl was afraid of spiders, flicking it off while telling her that she shouldn't have followed him into a forest if she was scared of spiders. Tᴇʀᴜ asked if he really wasn't frightened by them, but Nox asked if there were any knights who were afraid of spiders, making the girl feel embarrassed and try to defend herself. With her now off of his body, he felt as though he could breathe, but Nox started to cough again, which worried Tᴇʀᴜ, as he tried to say it wasn't of her concern. Nox thought about how the girl didn't really hold him down during the battle and how she even kind of saved his life, making him feel extremely grateful to the girl, even if he wouldn't tell her that directly. But now, Nox just had to find a way out, since his goal was achieved. The sun started to rise and Emma continued to sob, as she felt as though it was all her fault, and Rodwell stood there, wondering if things had gone wrong. Talia's disappearance could turn into a dispute between families, and this would not be the only repercussion, as there had been other reports of children from the manor disappearing into the forest, which would make the incompetence of the family be public discourse. Rodwell's attention was called to look toward the forest, where the fog was starting to lift. Everyone shouted in surprise, and the steward had his mouth wide open in bewilderment, as Emma bolted toward Rodwell to ask if that meant it was vanquished, to which Rodwell agreed. Their only hope was coming true, and Emma started to tear up with hope, before they witnessed Nox and Tᴇʀᴜ walking out of the forest, making the other servants wonder if Nox had truly conquered it. Rodwell couldn't gather his thoughts, but it was getting clear that the succession of the Lianhaba family leadership wouldn't be without tumult. Nox wondered why everyone was gathered there, and Emma ran to hug Tᴇʀᴜ with tears still in her eyes. The steward explained the situation, and Nox seemed surprised that everyone was anxious over the family black sheep going astray. But the boy turned to see Emma grabbing Tᴇʀᴜ and picking up the girl with an angry expression, telling her that she was going to have the codes of conduct being recited. Tᴇʀᴜ panicked and tried to apologize, but Emma continued, and said that the head of the Steel Liner family would read the lesson. Nox was surprised to see the handmaiden be freakishly strong as well, and Emma gave her gratitude to Nox, to which the boy said he had no intention of having Tᴇʀᴜ follow him, but he said that she proved herself capable, and didn't need too harsh of a punishment, making Tᴇʀᴜ blush in surprise. Later, they returned to the manor where Nox started to take off his bloody clothes, still surprised about the crowd waiting for him. But none of that mattered, since he had finally gotten the hidden treasure he was looking for. It was a ring that would increase his stats slightly, but had a special effect that would cause the wearer to suck in tiny fractions of their opponent's lifespan upon defeating them. The stronger the opponent, the more life the wearer could take. This was the only artifact that could do so, but of course, this ring alone couldn't save him from death, and it wasn't as if he could extend his life as much as he would like to, since the description said it was only tiny amounts. Even so, this gave him more hope, as he put it on and knew that it was better than nothing. He could feel his stats slightly rising, and called in Lona, knowing she was outside. The maid girl wondered if he could see through things, making him say, maybe, which caused Lona to become flustered, as she thought that he could see under her clothes. Nox bonked her, and the girl wondered if the boy had gotten stronger while rubbing the place where he hit her. Changing the topic, he told her that they were going to arm wrestle, something she seemed confident over, and said that he would raise her wage if she won and decrease if she lost. As they counted down, Nox slammed her arm down the moment it started, and she felt incredulous from the situation, begging the boy to not decrease her wage. But he mentioned that he heard that he was the famed lout of the family according to a certain maid. He grinned at her while Lona continued to beg him, but Nox suddenly had his sickliness trait activate, which caused his wrist to fracture and him to catch a cold. Nox felt disappointed, and told Lona to just get him ice and a towel while he sighed. and just tried to focus on the happiness of getting the ring, knowing that he should prioritize rest, but hated that he was hit with such a combo. Somewhere else, it seemed as though someone was trying to remember Nox's face, knowing his name from the other world. Karl and the Ring of Black Fire, the two hidden treasures from the Lienhabe Manor. The sun shined down upon the manor, and Nox learned that even though he had both of those treasures in his hands, he was made to spend 6 months locked up in the manor with no chance to put them to use. Nox stared at the sign and sighed, opening it, and grumbling to himself about how he should have no consequences of his actions due to the fact that he had vanquished the forest that no one else would dare to enter. He asked if Lona agreed, turning to the maid, who felt hesitant about saying anything. Nox said her wage decreasing could also be caused by her failure to keep him in a good mood, so she immediately complied while stammering as the boy flopped onto the couch. It was frustrating to him since he was getting more comfortable with this life, and how watching Karl grow filled him with much joy, so this couldn't go on. Not just for those things, but also because his death was approaching fast, and that he would die before the 6 months would end, something that he knew due to the system pop-up. These alerts seemed to care more about his remaining time than he did, making his body tremble before he would rise from the chair, and tell Lona that he was going to talk to his father to reclaim his freedom. She was about to tell him that his bath was ready, but she was interrupted by the sound of knocking, to which the door was opened and Nox witnessed Rodwell standing there and greeting him with a bow. The boy was surprised both by the steward's presence and the message that Theodore wanted to converse with Nox. Bodies of both the knights and monsters laid about the ground, while Theodore would remember the fateful night that he experienced that was now known throughout history as the Night of Carnage. Monsters shrieked while swarming toward the male, who clenched his dark sword before he started to slash through the enemies in his way. The images of the swarming devils, human corpses piled up, and the carnage that happened all raced through his mind and made him believe that it was more of a scourge. Theodore gazed off before feeling a dark and heavy energy around him, reminding him that he needed one of his sons to succeed in the ownership of his sword, the Vanquisher. People with half-baked potential wouldn't do, so the male wondered who was the right choice in having the decisive talent strong enough to end him. A knock was heard, and Rodwell let Theodore know that Nox was on his way, which Theodore acknowledged. He thought about how even he failed to resolve the mystery of the forest, and that Nox's achievement needed a reward for recognition. But unsurprisingly, the Omagers got involved and impeded the recognition. They found it hard to believe that Nox had changed, and demanded a thorough inquiry to verify that the forest had indeed been vanquished. And this was something that even Theodore couldn't dismiss, as the inquiry would have been necessary in any circumstance. Nox entered the room and greeted his father, before Theodore mentioned the wrongful conduct the boy had done in the past, likely talking about before he was reincarnated, which Nox was completely aware of. Regardless, Theodore acknowledged his accomplishments, and said that Nox could name any prize he wanted, which surprised the boy greatly. He sweat-dropped, since he didn't remember this from the game, as Theodore was normally cold and authoritative, so Nox lifted his head and asked for confirmation that this was the case. His father rose from the chair and swore on the history of their black blade that he was telling the truth in giving whatever Nox wanted. Nox was surprised, and the older male continued as he explained that any immoderate request would impact his opinion of the boy. But he had slight faith in Nox. Nox asked for time to contemplate, and permission was given, along with the permission for Nox to leave the estate whenever he wanted, as long as he didn't cause a similar commotion as last time. The light-haired boy thanked his father, who reminded him of his family name, and the next day everyone gathered outside to say goodbye to Talia and Emma. The red-haired girl blushed as she said her farewells, but Nox tried to ignore it even though the girl beamed at him. Rodwell told the boy it would be courteous to respond, so the purple-eyed boy groaned in frustration and turned to wish farewell to the girl as well, saying that they should meet again when she became a greater knight. Talia asked what she needed to become one, making him say that she needed a brave heart that didn't fear spiders. The girl flushed in embarrassment and punched him in the stomach, making him regret his word choice, as he should have said a wolf instead. Even so, the girl agreed, and told him that he should keep his nape clean to greet her blade, making him feel a chill as it was almost in bad taste considering what he knew of the future. Emma bowed and thanked the boy for all that he had done, along with saving Talia, but he said that wasn't his intention and told them to set forth without any more hesitation. The carriage rode away, and one of the characters had finally left, making Nox believe that he was getting used to this bizarre way of existence little by little. And hey, he might even be enjoying it. Another notification popped up and it told Nox that he had 146 days left, causing him to sigh at the fact that he couldn't catch a break from the reminders. A few days later, Lona asked him if he needed a new maid to attend him at school, and Nox hummed and thought, seemingly about to remember something until a knock was heard at the door. Rodwell entered, and told Nox that he was there to present the maid who would attend to him during his time at the academy starting today, to which the green-haired girl greeted Nox, and introduced herself as Zitri de Lobelia. The boy introduced himself back, before opening her stats and already seeing what he expected to see, glancing at how she was just surveilling him at the behest of Tᴇʀᴜ. The system reminded Nox about his upcoming death, making him sigh while he was getting ready for the day. But he could take slight solace in the fact that he was making fast progress despite all the penalties. Nox looked out onto the balcony and knew that he would soon enter the academy, which Lona seemed excited about as well, asking if he felt nervous. He asked a question back, wondering why she sounded festive while discussing his departure. She winced and sobbed, claiming that he would just be missed. But the boy told her to cut the act. The boy knew he shouldn't waste his time bullying Lona, as that time could be spent improving his abilities. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to make it through the programs at the school. After all, it was the best academy of the Empire, and it was bound to be crawling with students of many talents. People he had to survive along, and make himself a part of the main storyline, in order to become the villain he was supposed to be. Nox wondered why it had to be so complicated, and his thoughts were interrupted to ask him about a new maid needing to attend him at school. He hummed and thought, before Rodwell walked in to greet and present the very maid that Lona asked about, to which the green-haired girl introduced herself. Nox introduced himself as well, and glanced at her stats, noticing that she was there to survey him for his father, and she still put up a mask to seem kind and caring. Tᴇʀᴜ was one of the most powerful and diabolical men in the game's universe, especially due to the fact that his skills with the sword were not due to sheer excellence in the craft. His rise of power was due to his distrustful nature, observing everything and everyone. The maid had Tᴇʀᴜ's expectations placed on her, as she affirmed without hesitation, a cold look in her eyes. She was heard to be the first in line to the leadership of the Lobelia family, and in return for her services to him, he would help to support her for her restoration to the rank. Zitri vowed to do her best to assist Nox, but Tᴇʀᴜ didn't like the choice of words, glaring at her which made her flinch. She bowed again, and said that she would observe the boy and tell Tᴇʀᴜ of every detail. Proceeding to leave and sighing after escaping that scary aura, the girl took a breath, and pulled out to stare at what was around her neck, looking at a family picture while knowing she couldn't hesitate any more. When night arrived, Nox thought about how he now had a spy, wondering if she was chosen to make sure he was not being possessed. This was understandable, since possession by devils was quite common in this world. After all, the original game's story had Nox's undoing begin with the boy being possessed by a great devil. Nox believed that no one would find out about his true identity, sitting up, but he was still worried about Zitri, since she was not a figure in the main storyline, which was a waste in Nox's eyes, as she was meant to be the next head of the House of Lobelia. However, her uncle murdered her parents and snatched the leadership claim, with the rest of the story being obvious. The girl fled and ended up a maid at the Lianhaba family, while putting up a cheerful front, while beneath it all, she was despairing, and would soon give in. If Nox remembered right, the girl would meet her end even before the beginning of the first chapter of the story by taking her own life. He wondered what he should do, whether he should save a character meant to die with the risk of messing up the story, and fully understanding that it could impede his plans. The next day, Nox met up with both maids to tell them that he would be hunting monsters within the manor, and wanted them to accompany him as assistants. Lona felt shocked and shuddered at the thought, pretending that she was going to be sick, until Zitri interrupted and agreed without hesitation. The brown-haired girl sobbed and told Zitri to not say yes to everything, but Nox knew that fear was a reasonable reaction, so Zitri's answer was interesting. Nox reminded Lona of her lack of vacation days even if she tried to refuse, making Nox grin and mention her wage, which made the girl cry and ask what weapon she should wield. The boy chuckled, and Zitri told the girl that she would join after apprising Rodwell, making Nox think about how he needed to focus on getting himself more days to live, especially now that he was free. As they rode off into the forest, Tᴇʀᴜ watched from the window. A few days later, the Forest of Lost Children became like any other forest after being vanquished. A growl was heard from a grey wolf that Nox had swiftly charged at and slashed, testing out the abilities of the ring as it took away a tiny fraction of the grey wolf's life. He sighed in relief when the system told him that his remaining time had increased by 2 hours. Nox glanced off when he noticed that it seemed as though he had hunted all the wolves around in the forest, and the boy only gained those 2 hours from that single hunting session. Either way, he considered it a success. His thoughts were interrupted by Zitri mentioning that he had been hunting for an hour, asking Nox if he wasn't tired. This made him feel the opposite of the good feelings he felt just a second ago, since he was reminded of how it took forever to hunt without his time-slowing abilities, so he had only gained 1 net hour. Nox grabbed the flask and drank from it, thinking about what to do since it wasn't as if he could chase after monsters 24/7. And the worst problem of all was the fact that there wasn't an infinite number of monsters. He had practically decimated the monster population of the forest, and at this rate, his grand plan of stringing his life out would end up in the gutters soon. The purple-eyed boy sighed and wondered if there were any other monsters around, but Zitri told him to refrain from saying that, as people who didn't know better would think that he went crazy. He glanced at the setting sun and realized that they should return to the manor. to which the green-haired girl asked if he wanted a bath drawn, causing Nox to be surprised at her while agreeing to the suggestion. She smiled happily while Lona frantically asked what she could do as well, eventually getting assigned to tidy Nox's bedroom despite his confusion. The brown-haired girl rushed to gather up all the items while Tᴇʀᴜ would chuckle at the sight. Nox called the green-haired girl over and wanted to ask a question, wondering who she served. This shocked and confused her, as Nox glanced at her genius assistant trait, knowing that her blade was facing him and that he should not try to claim it. Tᴇʀᴜ looked away with a conflicted expression as Nox asked again, making Tᴇʀᴜ flinch and still hesitate. He was aware of her intended reply, and mentioned that he had no intention of inquiring further, saying that she, at the very least, did not try to feed him a lie. Nox said that he didn't care who she served, and just only cared that she was his servant and that she would use him as he would use her. The boy walked off while focusing on their mutual benefit of taking off each other, which was enough for the both of them. As night arrived, they returned to the manor, and Lona was continuing her gossip, talking about how Nox was evil for demanding too much of his attendance. She would think about when she asked why she must join, to which Nox seemingly looked like a devil to her when he said there was no joy without her joining. Tᴇʀᴜ chuckled and looked out the window, remembering how she was familiar with the rumors regarding Nox's change of heart, which had reached her when she was still with her family. She assumed they were baseless rumors, as it was rare for anyone to undergo such a profound change. But it seemed to be true after serving him for a while, and learning that he had defeated his two brothers in a single duel and rightfully earned the right to represent his family name at the academy. Nox was consolidating his ground within his family, unlike Tᴇʀᴜ, once a legitimate heir to the family leadership, who was now floundering in the abyss. She sighed to herself and remembered the words he had said to her that day, how she would use him as he would use her, which made the green-haired girl pause her writing and wonder what they meant. A few days later, rumors started to spread within the Lienhaba manor about how Tᴇʀᴜ was expelled from the Lobelia family, and being a commoner, she no longer deserved to serve the Lienhabas. When the girl read the letter, she crumpled it up, as it claimed that the previous head, Darren de Lobelia, had committed a transgression of seeking to trade away the family honor. Since Tᴇʀᴜ was associated with Darren, that would mean that Tᴇʀᴜ also had her privileges revoked, making her lose the light in her eyes, since she knew that she would no longer be able to stay in the manor. Even among the families harnessing darkness, the Lienhaba family held the utmost authority. Even if for a service to their half-abandoned son, they wouldn't engage a commoner without a family name, making Tᴇʀᴜ believe that she would soon face dismissal and find herself replaced. Despite this, Tᴇʀᴜ still tried to put on a fake smile, and would greet the other maids who had already heard the news and would stare with disdain. However, Lona would still greet her just the same. This made Tᴇʀᴜ confused and awkward, feeling her hand get pulled as the green-haired girl wondered if this was just Lona behavior due to their companionship. Regardless, Tᴇʀᴜ believed it would do no good for anyone in the manor. As Lona pulled Tᴇʀᴜ down the hall, Nox knew that it was likely the end for Tᴇʀᴜ, as Theodore had likely received a letter as well. He knew that all the accusations against Tᴇʀᴜ's father were fabricated, but he knew that he couldn't help, since he had no way to predict the repercussions that a single flutter of a butterfly's wings could have on the world. Birds fluttered through the sky, and the gray wolves of the forest continued getting slain by Nox, while Lona felt a chill, believing as though the boy was being somewhat scarier that day. The brown-haired girl whispered to herself and Tᴇʀᴜ, mentioning that Nox usually had some degree of mercy, but that was absent that day. She hummed and thought, and Tᴇʀᴜ wondered if she should be nervous, glancing at the bloody blade that he plunged into the ground. Nox muttered to himself, wondering if he just wasn't having the type of luck he hoped to have. A hidden boss gets generated when the forest's monster population drops down to less than 20% of its usual level. The species and time of the occurrence of this hidden boss are random, so if Nox encountered and defeated one, it could have helped with his attributes. He sighed and was about to dismiss the situation until suddenly, he felt something rushing through the trees, catching his attention. Nox wondered what it was but didn't have enough time to react when it sped past him, making him know that this was definitely the boss. He turned to it and saw that it was an elite giant hornet, something that he knew was tricky to defeat but not undefeatable. The boy's thoughts couldn't even finish when he heard the voice of Tᴇʀᴜ calling out to him, making him turn to see the maid using her body to shield against the hornet's attack. This was something that he probably could have blocked, so Tᴇʀᴜ's actions were unnecessary. So, knowing that, why did she do it? How many people would jump out to block a monster's attack with their own bodies, and to save a person who recently made it clear that he would use them? With that, Nox grit his teeth and activated his time-slowing ability. When Tᴇʀᴜ was younger, she was a very clumsy child, falling and hurting herself before proceeding to cry and bringing a lot of worry to her parents. Her mother and father would always tell the girl that she always had an open wound, words that held true even as she had grown beyond childhood. When Nox told the green-haired girl who she served, Tᴇʀᴜ wondered where her allegiance lay. She thought back to that one horrible memory of hers, where a family member of hers had killed off her parents and claimed the family name. So Tᴇʀᴜ wondered once again where her allegiance lay. Nox's words echoed through Tᴇʀᴜ's mind, and it seemed as though she woke up, with Nox and Lona hovering above her with worry in their eyes. The boy had already defeated the Hornet, and he told the green-haired girl to stay with them, feeling tense while trying to reassure her that they were going to take her back to the mansion. Tᴇʀᴜ believed that Nox was a liar for saying that he would use her, yet was worried over her state, wondering why that was the case, before her vision became blurry and her eyes closed with tears falling down her face. And the girl noticed a tremor and faint fury within the boy's voice. Back at the manor, Theodore was reading the letter that everyone else heard the news of, to which Rodwell confirmed the accuracy of. Theodore only took the girl in to use her as leverage and ultimately engulfed the Lobelia family. The family was faltering in the wake of the passing of their previous house leader, so it could have been an ideal opportunity for Theodore to infiltrate the family. For example, they could have contended that their heir was in jeopardy, citing the instability within the family as proof, and as Tᴇʀᴜ's protector, Theodore would have had the perfect plan to get involved and subjugate the family. However, before any of that could take place, it seemed as though the girl had been expelled, so the older male asked Rodwell for his opinion. The steward said that having a servant without a family name would subject Nox to disdain at the academy, so it would be wise to remove her, to which Theodore agreed. Suddenly, they were interrupted by another servant barging in to tell them that Nox had returned from his hunt, while bringing in Tᴇʀᴜ, who had fallen because of a monster. In a bid to save her, Nox had used a very costly antidote, startling Rodwell, as he asked if the male meant the Mandrakian decontaminant, to which the servant affirmed. Rodwell felt exhausted by the situation, and Theodore wondered if Nox had taken a liking to the servant girl, when Theodore believed that there would be consequences of such sentiments. Lona was standing above Tᴇʀᴜ and was trying to get her awake, succeeding, as the crying girl was happy to see Tᴇʀᴜ awake and alive. The green-haired girl wondered what happened and focused on worrying about Nox reacting negatively to what she had done. Lona explained that Nox ordered an antidote to be used, explaining it was highly effective, and was threatened by Nox to be used despite the physician's hesitance. Tᴇʀᴜ wondered why Nox would use such an item on her despite his earlier words, causing Tᴇʀᴜ to try and rise from the bed to ask about where Nox was. Lona mentioned that he was having a word with Rodwell, reminding Lona that she needed to apprise Nox of her awakening, so she quickly left. The sickly girl got up from the bed and walked over to a suitcase, starting to fill it while thinking about how she didn't belong there or anywhere in her eyes. She clutched her necklace and opened it to look and take her family photo out, writing a note for Nox to tell him that her pendant would settle her debt to him, and that she would hold him with gratitude. Tᴇʀᴜ left the room, but halted when Nox was there to ask where she was going, causing her to wince when his cold eye stared at her as he asked the question again. Before Tᴇʀᴜ had been healed, Nox would ask the physician if he valued a vial of potion above a human being, but the physician tried to say that the problem was that he needed permission from Theodore or Rodwell. Nox interrupted the man, glancing at Tᴇʀᴜ's body, while asking if Rodwell's words really held a greater authority than Nox's, making the physician feel bad, as Nox said that he would personally inform his father of the actions done. The antidote was used, and Lona asked if the girl would be alright, to which the physician reassured and said the venom was neutralized, making Lona sigh in relief. The boy turned to walk out of the room, telling Lona to apprise him when Tᴇʀᴜ would awaken. When Nox would go to meet with Theodore, his father was astonished, since he would not expect an unannounced visit from Nox. Theodore seemed to already know the topic of the matter, to which the boy activated his positive trait, reminding his father about how he owed the boy a wish. Because of that, Nox said that his wish was to keep Tᴇʀᴜ by his side. His father glanced down for a moment, while Nox thought about his actions and beliefs so far, how he had been trying to preserve the story and avoid the butterfly effect, how he knew that her status was being a spy under Theodore's control. None of that mattered at this moment, since the moment Tᴇʀᴜ threw herself in front of Nox to protect him, it became clear that while she couldn't answer his question, her actions did. Theodore decided to allow the wish, making the boy bow and turn to his father once again. Nox asked to elaborate further upon his wish, being given permission as the system started to warn the boy about his agitation affecting his act. But Nox continued, and said that he didn't intend to tolerate anyone who would toy with his people, whether it would be the Lord or his father. With a cold glare, Nox left the room, which brings us back to where Nox stumbled upon Tᴇʀᴜ about to leave, causing him to ask where she was going. The green-haired girl was hesitant, but admitted that she was taking her leave, since she felt as though she didn't deserve to stay. But her words were interrupted by Nox, who asked where she, an attendant still in service, was going, despite her duties. She mentioned how Nox knew about her surveillance on him under Theodore's order, and how she hadn't been honest, but she was confused why he kept giving her a chance even when she tried to deceive him. Her tearful face wanted to know why the boy wasn't dismissing her, making Nox grin at the real Tᴇʀᴜ that had been hidden under the disguise, the look of someone who is struggling, but hadn't given up on finding her way out of the darkness. Nox explained that deception was a destiny shared by all humans, but Tᴇʀᴜ still felt as though she had wronged the boy, which Nox agreed to and asked if she was going to leave without correcting the wrongs. This confused her, as the purple-eyed boy explained that she was staying, and how he didn't care if she had a family name, as all he cared about was her talent and service. He told her that she would atone for her wrongs by continuing her duties by his side, causing Tᴇʀᴜ to tear up once again as she agreed to his words, and would assist him for as long as it would take. Nox smiled at this, and Tᴇʀᴜ decided to mention his earlier question, turning to him and hoping that her answer had satisfied him, to which he grinned back and affirmed that it did. Lona continued her gossip the next day and talked about how he threatened the physician until she would be startled by Nox's presence, making him surprised that she wouldn't even deny it anymore. The girl would turn to Tᴇʀᴜ and remind the maid to get some rest, immediately dashing away to do the chores in place of Tᴇʀᴜ. Nox sighed at the sight of Lona's scatterbrained attitude and turned towards Tᴇʀᴜ, reminding her about his soon departure to the academy in 2 months. She said that she hadn't forgotten and had already arranged the essentials, such as basic tools that he would require, humming thought at what else she packed, as Nox grinned at the fact that Tᴇʀᴜ wasn't putting an act up anymore, which worked better for him, as it would save on his own efforts as well, and now he would know that the two of them wouldn't betray each other if one of them were to be driven to the corner. The boy smiled and believed that was enough for the both of them. Later, Tᴇʀᴜ wanted to ask the boy if he was alright, since there had been some unfavorable rumors in circulation regarding him. Nox sat down and asked about them, wondering what else would there be, since he had already been hearing the usual. He learned that it was the rumor about the reason for which he hadn't dismissed her, that being his personal feelings toward her. The boy almost slipped out of his chair hearing these words, making him wonder why he was even playing the character of Nox. He sighed and apologized to Tᴇʀᴜ for the situation, but the green-haired girl said that was not her intention. Rather, she was just concerned that it might discomfort Nox. Nox told Tᴇʀᴜ that there were worse rumors surrounding him, such as the ones about how the youngest Lienhaber was a boorish, scoundrelly simpleton. Tᴇʀᴜ was about to hesitate and say otherwise, but he told her to lie to him if she wished to be dismissed, making her immediately agree that was what she had heard. There was something else that she had heard about, and that was how he was known as lecherous around women, and wondered if that was true, making Nox feel worse about the character he was playing. But he was glad that his reputation as a swordsman had gone up compared to the person Nox used to be. These days, the rumors now were the sloppy talent with an oversized ego, but he needed to stick to the character, as a villain was a villain after all, and it was Nox's job to stay evil and help the main characters stand out. When it came down to it, he was not the hero of the game. He told Tᴇʀᴜ that it was enough with the rumors, as he wanted to tell her to fetch something, since she was not the only one who could use preparations to survive at the academy. She wondered what he needed, and Nox knew it wouldn't hurt to let her into the plan due to her loyalty trait, and it could make her even better at her job. With that in mind, Nox told her that he wanted to study magic prior to his enrollment and needed her assistance, surprising the green-haired girl due to the imperial law. He knew this, of course, and wasn't easily intimidated, but Tᴇʀᴜ saw it more like he didn't hold grudges. Either way, she understood and trusted that he had reasons for making the decision, knowing that she would start by looking for textbooks regarding the topic, which made Nox grin at how she knew what to do. The boy heard commotion outside and peered out the window, hearing about someone named Gren having arrived. This was a man that Nox had almost forgotten about, and felt an important event looming, as it would be a chance to add many days to his life. Nox told Tᴇʀᴜ that it was time to soon depart somewhere distant, making her sweat drop as she sensed another scheme. Later in the day, Theodore congratulated Gran on his graduation. This man was the second eldest son of Theodore, and was naturally one of Nox's brothers. Nox immediately checked out Grin's stats and saw that the male was a snob and lecher like the rumors for Nox himself, yet was also an opportunist. But the reason his character was not widely discussed was because Nox was a bigger ruffian in the family, along with Grin having an easier path to graduation with his shrewd nature and political schemes. In each cycle, the academy accepted less than 1,000 students, of whom only half would obtain their diplomas, so there was no way Grin played fair. Theodore asked if his son arranged transit to Tᴇʀᴜs, making the male halt before affirming so. Their father knew that Gran's chief duty was likely subduing monsters, and Nox knew that Tᴇʀᴜs was a natural territory south of the manor with a desert serving as a natural frontier between them and the eastern kingdom of Tᴀʀᴜ. It was infamously barren and overwhelmed with monsters, to which Gran would be issued as a first assignment to prevent a monster wave, and be important to the boy, as the reward was recognition as an imperial knight. Gran knew about the monster swarms, and Theodore mentioned about the territory preventing harm from the rest of the empire, telling his son to defend it well. Gran agreed, but Nox knew that the assignment was more than just slaying monsters, as the sub-story chapter in the game had a connection with many other chapters, so there was a lot to be gained. Nox called for his brother's attention, and asked if he minded his company, knowing that his presence would benefit from the gains of the chapter. This question surprised Gran, and made him believe that his brother didn't know what Tᴇʀᴜs was like, but Nox explained what he understood of it, reminding Gran of the rumors that he had heard ever since arriving. Nox knew that Gran's skill was coming up, hearing his brother ask if Nox truly vanquished the forest in the company of Thalia, to which Nox affirmed without hesitation or agitation, emotions that the skill allows Gᴇᴜ to detect. This was also the secret behind his mastery of crafty conduct. Gᴇᴜ also asked about the drill hall combat and the aid from Dzītrī, things that Nox also affirmed while activating his Heart of Steel skill against the detection skill. The brother chuckled and said he had reasons to decline, saying that he would be too busy to recover Nox's dead body. Suddenly, Theodore said Nox could go, surprising Gᴇᴜ, as Theodore reassured the brother and insisted on bringing him along. Gᴇᴜ tried to refuse until their father glared at the male, gazing at Nox and telling him to use his remaining 3 days wisely, proceeding to leave. The boy was surprised at how easy everything was, so Nox wondered if Theodore was up to something, but his thoughts were interrupted by Gᴇᴜ asking what Nox's plans were, and if he had lost his mind. Nox said that he had lost it a while ago, causing Gᴇᴜ to grab Nox's collar and tell the boy to be more cautious, as it would be a shame if he got hurt before even setting off to Tᴇʀᴜs. Suddenly, someone seemed to have dropped a bottle of wine, as Nox turned to see Dzītrī tripping behind. When Dzītrī tripped and had the wine bottle slip out of her hands, Nox was surprised to turn around and see it splash on his clothes, to which the green-haired girl bowed and apologized for her clumsiness. She suggested that he should wait in his bedroom while she would fetch him a fresh shirt, causing Gᴇᴜ to release the boy from his clutches. Nox gave his apologies to his brother and said that he would retire, walking away while saying that in 3 days they could continue their reacquaintance, causing the older brother to grit his teeth and clench his fist. As the purple-eyed boy stepped through the halls with Dzītrī by his side, he thanked the maid for what she did to spare him from the conversation, but Dzītrī couldn't help but sigh at how much adversity Nox seemed to attract daily. She changed the topic to ask him if he was really sure about going with Gᴇᴜ to Tᴇʀᴜs, which Nox interrupted her and was about to affirm, until he was interrupted himself by a shrill shout from Lona, who ran up to him and asked if he had lost his mind. Nox wondered if the brown-haired girl had forgotten that he was her master, but he sighed and insisted that the decision was already made, wondering what the big deal was with him going to Tᴇʀᴜs, since he thought it was fitting. Dzītrī agreed with Lona and was also concerned for the safety of Nox, believing that Tᴇʀᴜs was too dangerous despite his gallant spirit, as there were thousands of monsters and bandits known to reside on the land. The number didn't scare him, as Nox believed that just meant there were more things to hunt and more lifetime for him to steal, reassuring the maids that he had plans regarding such perils. He was about to tell Lona and Dzītrī that they would both remain at the manor while he would carry out the campaign unaccompanied. However, Dzītrī interrupted him with a stern tone and affirmed she wouldn't let him do that. The green-haired girl continued and reminded him that she was an aide exclusively in his service, so she was duty-bound to assist him regardless of his location, meaning she would follow him to Tᴇʀᴜs. Nox said that it would risk her getting hurt, but Dzītrī was well aware, and reminded him that he could get hurt as well, since they were both bound for a dangerous place, especially since she heard from Lona that Nox was delicate. Dzītrī continued and asked if Nox believed that his delicacy could afford an unassisted journey given his frequent forgetfulness and inexperience in laundering, asking if he believed a journey without aid was attainable. The boy ran a hand through his hair and realized that he had forgotten this wasn't a game anymore, and such details of life mattered, and that if he died, Dzītrī's place in the manor would get even more precarious, so for her coming with him would actually be the safest choice. With that, Nox decided to agree, and said that she shouldn't drag them behind, suggesting that she should acquaint herself with Karl, his horse. Dzītrī understood and was actually already a step ahead, since she was about to say she was on excellent terms with Karl. But this information shocked Lona and made her ask how this happened. The green-haired maid said that she simply used the finest sugar lumps, which cost her half her monthly pay, but expedited the friendship between her and the horse. Lona felt jealous of this, since she would always get assorted hay for the horse, continuing to complain until Nox would proceed to hit her and turn to leave while saying Lona would continue her usual manorial duties. Dzītrī would accompany him on the trip, so he told the green-haired girl to prepare thoroughly, but Nox couldn't help but wonder if Lona had already gotten over being worried for his safety. A knock was heard which made everyone freeze and stare with confusion, until the door opened to Rodwell, who let Nox know that he was being summoned to be given an item. This surprised Nox that his father wanted to give him something, remembering Theodore's words, which he wondered if it was about that, but he would find out soon enough. The boy met up with Theodore and mentioned the topic of the summon, to which Theodore affirmed so, and wondered if his son could truly wield the item at all. They both glanced at the blade that sat in an open box, one that Theodore explained had belonged to the progenitor of the family. Surprised by the situation, since this was not what he expected to be given at all. All the times that Nox had played the game, he hadn't even had a glimpse of this sword. And yet, even after 27 completed runs making him think he was a pro, there was a sword he had never heard of. He wondered why Theodore was offering it to him, and couldn't read into his intentions, but this made him think that the sword would be important later. Theodore spoke and knew that the sword was humble in looks, interrupting Nox's thoughts, as his father reassured him that this was the sword that the very first leader of the family spent his entire life wielding. Nox asked how he would demonstrate his capability to wield it, to which his father said simply to hold it. With that, the boy grabbed it and picked it up, only to suddenly feel a heavy and dark aura coming from the blade. He realized it was absorbing his magical energy, noticing that the color of the blade had also started to change, causing Tᴇʀᴜ to get up when he noticed his son sensing the flow of energy. The boy nodded, and his father explained that the sword absorbed magic from the wielder before multiplying it several-fold, surprising the boy, as he asked if it was a blade not to be brandished lightly. He was interrupted by the sword absorbing his magical energy once again, to which the system warned the boy that his magical energy was draining at an alarming rate, and was negatively affecting the act he was putting up, which worried the boy. Tᴇʀᴜ spoke once again and said that if Nox wanted to be the next owner of the sword, he had to hold it for 10 whole minutes, something that Nox could not fathom, as Tᴇʀᴜ said the sword was called Stormbringer. The sword was currently under restraint, and the system told Nox that it would absorb magic power while converting it into attribute points, while also emitting the amplified magical power. This information was not really helping Nox at the moment, as he was quivering from how much it was negatively affecting him. Nox soon learned that his magical energy had completely drained out, so the sword decided to choose his life as an alternate fuel, confusing him, as the system warned him that his remaining lifetime was decreasing at an alarming rate, which worried the boy greatly. He believed he needed to let go of the sword for his own safety. However, Nox saw that it seemed as though his hands didn't want to let go of the sword, despite his efforts. This frustrated Nox, as he was upset with the situation he was now stuck in, while Tᴇʀᴜ would watch, thinking about how the sword, the Stormbringer, was quite a wicked sword. It would drive the wielder to destruction in exchange for its service, and the history and renown of their family stemmed from its blade. But no descendant of its first owner had succeeded in taming it. Most of those who tried had fainted the moment they took it into their hands, something that Tᴇʀᴜ had witnessed many times. So if anyone lasted 10 minutes on their first try, it would be a veritable feat. Even Tᴇʀᴜ himself could only last a mere hour after all those years of training with it. And yet, something in Tᴇʀᴜ nagged him to try the 14-year-old kid who hadn't even developed his magic yet. By the time Nox had saved the dying servant girl, it became evident that amidst all the recent disturbances stood Nox, which was hardly a coincidence. The boy was growing and his potential was coming into view, so Tᴇʀᴜ wondered if the boy would exceed his expectations, watching as Nox collapsed to one knee while still holding the blade. Perhaps Nox's talents would stand in comparison with those of the Three Supreme. The thought alone sufficed enough of a reason for Tᴇʀᴜ to assess the boy. Should he succeed in lasting the given time, Tᴇʀᴜ believed that Nox would make the most potent leader in the history of the Lienhabas. Nox pointed the blade to the ground as it started to crack the floor, panting heavily while Tᴇʀᴜ believed that his son had the potential to excel him. The boy grit his teeth and turned to the older male, who mentioned how he had been suspecting the boy of concealing the power he held within. Nox was about to ask what was going on, until his father walked past him, saying that the sword now belonged to Nox. But this didn't make Nox happy, considering he had lost a lot of life. 3 days later, it was time to depart to Tᴇʀᴜs, and Dzītrī felt content, mentioning how it was nice of Tᴇʀᴜ to give the boy a pouch to fit all of his items. Even so, Nox was still not happy, which made Dzītrī confused, since she thought he was anticipating the expedition, but he was looking so upset. He sighed and wondered if he was supposed to feel grateful to his father for the pouch after the sword had sucked in most of his remaining time. Glancing forward at Grin, who was chatting with the others, Nox knew that his brother milked a small fortune, and exaggerated the burden of him tagging along. But Nox didn't care, as he would use his brother too. Shouts were heard as there seemed to be trouble regarding the direction toward Tᴇʀᴜs, making Grin upset at the man named Ron, who was hired by Grin to guide them. The men argued, and Dzītrī glanced up at Nox, who called the path divergers foolish for leading them astray, so he rode up to his brother to discuss the issue. Grin tried to wave and dismiss Nox, but Nox continued his words, which seemed to anger Grin, as Nox asked if it didn't concern him if he could find them the right path. Grin was in disbelief at the fact that his brother believed he could be a pathfinder, to which Nox suggested enlisting his talent only for a day, since he was told by several of their homagers that he had a remarkable talent in wayfinding. Grin had doubt, but was still surprised by the claim, as Dzītrī stared with the same amount of surprise. However, the expression was because Nox was lying so casually without hesitation. A belated arrival could pose a grave issue, but if Nox failed to do what he claimed in front of everyone, it would supposedly dampen Nox's spirits and bring contentment to Grin. After all, risking a minimally extended voyage was not the worst choice. So Grin decided to allow it, which made Nox grin and tell everyone to follow him. Later in the day, a camp was set up for everyone to rest for the night, and Grin was complaining to his pathfinders about how Nox found the path so swiftly, since they were in territory that even the most seasoned wayfinders struggled in. The older brother continued his angry complaints, while Nox watched silently in the distance, knowing that it was easy for him since he already knew the paths due to his previous gaming experience. Tᴇʀᴜs was a strategic foothold that he had been at hundreds of times, but Dzītrī wanted to ask directly to the boy how he managed to find the way so quickly, to which Nox claimed that it was the ground that helped him. She was confused, until she saw the claw marks of an evil bear, a type of monster that was native to the southern region and was found near the southern frontiers of Tᴇʀᴜs. This information surprised the green-haired girl, but also worried her about the possibility of being attacked. But he reassured her that the bears feared fire. Everyone around gossiped amongst themselves about how Nox was a different person, and could even surpass his academy-educated brother, making Gᴇᴜ get even more upset, as he asked one of the servants to confirm Nox's success against the twins, to which Schultz confirmed. With that, Gᴇᴜ wanted to see the boy's skills personally, so Schultz said there was the perfect item to help, pulling out a bag that Gᴇᴜ chuckled evilly at the sight of while glancing at Nox. In the dead of night, everyone went to bed, and even the guards seemed to be drowsy, as a monster rustled through the trees toward their camp, something that Nox had expected, as he already had the blade in hand before he would proceed to get up and tell Dzītrī to not leave the tent. The leaves breezed in the wind as Nox exited the tent, and stood opposite the 4 monsters that he knew as ogres. While he knew that the camp was safe from monsters, the boy glanced over at what he knew had lured the monsters toward them. That mud must have been spiked with ogres' pheromones, which got the attention of the ogres, whose senses were heightened in time for their mating season, so they wouldn't be able to resist it. Nox knew that the mud must have been Gᴇᴜ's idea to put Nox in danger, but he wasn't alarmed by their presence and even greeted the ogres, while taking out Stormbringer. The monsters growled before charging at the boy, who blocked their attack, leaping into the air and plunging his blade into the back of one of the ogres. The other ogres tried to aim their clubs at him, but he was faster, and dashed through while slicing them along the way. They all shouted with pain as Nox glanced at the Sword of Darkness, realizing that all his worries of it sapping him dry were in vain. He grinned before continuing the slaughter, feeling as though the sword would read his mind and start moving in advance. There was now only one ogre left, but it staggered, dropping its weapon and attempting to escape. However, Nox whistled at Karl, causing the horse to transform into its true form as Nox hopped on it and galloped toward the ogre and slashed it. Nox let out a breath of relief as his remaining time had increased by a day and 9 hours. His thoughts interrupted by Dzītrī peeking out and asking if everything was all right. He reminded her of the order he said, but she ignored the words and was surprised at the sight of the ogre corpses, asking if she should summon the night patrol. Nox said that there was no need, as the ogres came invited, confusing her, until he explained that it was Gᴇᴜ's doing to set them upon the others, which was also why Gᴇᴜ's tent was at a distance. Dzītrī asked if this meant that Gᴇᴜ was plotting to constrain Nox, which the boy affirmed without hesitation, explaining that he would potentially pose a hindrance to Gᴇᴜ's pursuit of the household leadership, so Gᴇᴜ likely wanted to examine Nox's capabilities. Such cowardly schemes were likely the only way he could claim a decisive edge over Garen, his older brother, who is a superior swordsman, but Gᴇᴜ could do with a lesson on how such tricks didn't work on Nox. The boy pulled out a vial, asking Dzītrī if she knew what provoked ogres even more, while proceeding to squeeze the ogre blood into it, as that was what provoked them much like humans, since they could not forego a vendetta when their kin were killed. Owls were heard throughout the night as Gᴇᴜ was awakened by the crystal balls humming, confusing him, as it only emitted such a noise at the presence of a monster's magical energy. He wondered what could be the case until he heard thumping noises, as his servants barged in to tell him that they needed to escape, to which Gᴇᴜ exited the tent and saw swarms of ogres. A chill ran down Gᴇᴜ's spine as he hoped that they wouldn't pursue him, but the sun was seen to rise as everyone finally fought off the ogres and were cleaning up. Gᴇᴜ was yelling at Schultz for potentially making a mistake, but even the servant was confused. However, Nox seemed completely unfazed by the situation, and asked Dzītrī if she agreed about the morning being heavenly. She agreed, and mentioned the breakfast being ready, but she also told Nox that maids don't sit with their masters. Nox said that wasn't the case as of now, as there were worse situations, like how swarms of ogres went for Gᴇᴜ's tent, making Dzītrī stare with contempt while sighing, as she remembered the audacity of the person she served. Nox chuckled and started to eat as he watched the tents being taken down, seeing how they weren't going to throw away the bloodied one. The girl asked what they were going to do about it, and Nox feigned ignorance to the act, as Dzītrī explained that the bloodstain would attract more ogres, but that was something that Nox knew and was exactly how he intended it. However, he wouldn't tell that to Dzītrī in order to prevent her nagging, but this was the perfect opportunity for more lifetime. When he finished his breakfast, he realized that he was going to be needing more ogres soon. In the distance, Nox could hear a rumble, and told the green-haired girl that they would join the rest. Meanwhile, a stray ogre was walking through the forest until it seemed to sense something, turning around in confusion before it was suddenly overtaken and killed within seconds. It was now day 2 of their journey, and Nox had successfully grasped the topography of the area, making him feel relieved given the length of the journey. Gran asked Nox about his plan with the ogres pursuing them, asking if it was possible to throw them off, which Nox affirmed. He said that they could choose to quell the disturbance, but that would also attract other monsters, so it would be wiser to just get out of the woods in haste. However, Gren didn't believe these words and felt upset that the soldiers were flocking to Nox's standards instead of Grienne's. Another soldier walked up and asked Nox what he was rapping the ground for, and that was because he knew that some monsters were known to soar from the ground, causing panic within the others. The boy glanced down and affirmed so, explaining that they were crossing a certain habitat. As everyone started to feel the ground rumble, Tᴇʀᴜ was startled and screams were heard as Nox announced the worm was coming, seeing it sprout from the ground. This was a monster that mostly resembled an earthworm or a python, but such resemblance belies the fact that it was a dragon with a malformation issue, due to which it could not use magic. However, it was still powerful, since it was not uncommon for dozens of ogres to try and fight it only to meet a collective end. This was also why he had been looking for such a monster, seeing it eat the horse as none of the others knew that Nox had been stamping the ground to invite it. The boy turned to the others and told them to hide in the bushes, confusing the others, which made Nox grin when he remembered that he said the ogres would pose no issue to them. This was not technically wrong, even if throwing the ogres off was not in his plan in the first place, seeing the other swarms of ogres come out of the forest. Tᴇʀᴜ had worry on her face as she felt scared by the legion of ogres, but Nox reassured her, and asked the green-haired girl if she knew what a worm's most and least preferred creatures were. She was confused before cowering at the rumbling, as Nox explained the answer to both was ogres. As the two species fought, the boy explained that ogres were the preferred prey to the worms, but also did not make the closest of pals, so an advanced adventurer should know to turn such situations to his advantage. The worm shrieked and crushed one of the ogres, while the other monsters tried to hit the worm with their clubs, as everyone stared with shock at how the two species were trying to finish each other off. Gṛeʌn gritted his teeth and wondered if Nox predicted this, and Tᴇʀᴜ wondered if they should just wait, but Nox had other plans. The purple-eyed boy watched the battle and started to throw some rocks at the ogres, confusing Tᴇʀᴜ at how it would help. As the ogres continued getting killed, the system would tell Nox that his stamina was increasing along with his lifetime, extending his lifespan by 8 hours with each ogre defeated. This wouldn't be something he would explain to the green-haired maid, but he needed to get his stats up. Nox realized that all the ogres were now dead, and Gṛeʌn wondered what the plan was now, since he couldn't take it on himself, so Nox got up and ordered the soldiers to aim at the worm's mouth. There was hesitation, but everyone eventually followed, doing what Nox said, as the boy activated his time-slowing ability and charged forward while the arrows and spears slowed down in the air. Nox would leap and slash the worm multiple times, spinning and landing as the ability stopped and showed the worm exploding with blood from his actions. This increased his days by 10, which was more than expected, but he enjoyed that big monsters benefited him so much, although it wouldn't have been so easy without the ogres. When Nox's stamina reached 5, his temporary trait expired, which was part of the details when he activated the scroll all that while ago. It was unfortunate, but at least he got there at all. Nox clenched his fist and everyone was checking up on the boy, while cheering about how skilled Nox was, and Nox was about to answer until he was interrupted by some more crackling and rumbling noises, as another worm sprouted from the ground. Nox was slightly surprised by the presence of a second worm. However, he would be even more surprised when someone shouted at the others to get out of the way, as the worm was immediately sliced and killed by a new person. This monocle-wearing person was someone that Nox had recognized, and he wondered why they were there at all. Nox wondered what this monocle-wearing person was doing here, recognizing this character immediately. Everyone else also recognized who this person was, and knew that they were a pupil of a person named Celsus, the genius swordsman, strongest unit in the universe and one of the 3 supremes alongside Theodore. This man was called Paracelsus. This new male asked if the rules of nobility dictated that they must refrain from expressing gratitude when they were saved, and Nox remembered that this was also the man who harbored a great hatred toward the nobility. Schultz felt offended on Gṛeʌn's part, and asked if Paracelsus knew who Gṛeʌn was, but Paracelsus only gave a passive-aggressive response. Paracelsus introduced himself and said that he was a mercenary of some sort, while Nox would remember how this man would be expected to hate nobles given his background, but more importantly, he was not supposed to come onto the scene until the Academy chapter would begin. In his previous life, Nox had played this game countless times, but never had Paracelsus appear before the Academy year started. The boy wondered what was happening, clenching his fist while glancing over at Paracelsus and wondering what he was going to do now. The sun started to set as the group rode through the terrain, and Gṛeʌn tried to make a conversation with the mercenary, asking if he was bound for Chaders as well. Paracelsus affirmed so, and said he was heading there to hunt monsters, making Nox hum in thought while remembering that Paracelsus was a man who traveled to different realms of the Empire to train himself before the school year began. So Nox wondered if the realm he traveled is randomly selected for each run. Gṛeʌn noticed that Paracelsus was traveling by himself, which meant that the monocle-wearing male showed confidence in his abilities. So Gṛeʌn mentioned that he paid his men handsomely, and asked if Paracelsus would be interested in joining the campaign against the monster wave under his command. Paracelsus glanced over at Nox's brother with a raised eyebrow, humming in thought, before turning away and saying that he was intrigued about the idea of working under the Lienhaba family. Nox watched in the distance as Schultz tried to defend and be offended on Gṛeʌn's behalf, but Gᴇᴜ interrupted and waved his hand to stop the other male, instead telling Paracelsus to take his time and give it due consideration. Gᴇᴜ had witnessed this male striking a worm down with a single sweep, so he wanted to have this man under his command in order to reclaim the trust of his soldiers that Nox had taken away from him. The group finally arrived at their destination, which Nox let be known to the others. Looking ahead at how the place was much more desolate in real life than it was in the game, they were let through the gate and Gᴇᴜ clicked his tongue at the sight of rats scuttering around. But his attention was moved to a girl who was weakly asking if he had any food to spare. Gᴇᴜ looked with disgust at the little girl and jerked his horse away from her, making her flinch with surprise. Nox glanced away as well, which made the little girl's expression droop and her head hang low. Paracelsus glanced at the girl and clicked his tongue as well, and the group was stopped by a male who introduced himself as Tᴇʀᴛ, greeting the others and explaining that he was the chief of the town guard. He had already heard the news that Gᴇᴜ was on his post-graduation mission, and was having Nox lend support, continuing to speak with the nobleman while Paracelsus said that he might have gotten his hopes up too high about the sons of a supreme somehow being different than the other nobles, since they were chosen to represent the family. When the mercenary witnessed Nox battling the worm, Nox didn't seem half bad at swordcraft, but Paracelsus still believed that these Lienhabers were still mollycoddled through and through. He stared with disappointment and observed the town around him, noticing how it was evidently disordered, and the townsfolk had no capacity to endure the monster wave, which made Paracelsus wonder if the ones who hadn't perished of hunger were even the more fortunate ones. Since the sun was nigh unto setting, it was decided that they would discuss everyone's duties the next day, so Tᴇʀᴛ led them to an inn where everyone could find rest. Everyone got off their horses and started to set up for the night, while Gᴇᴜ would stare at Paracelsus, who had mentioned the proposition from earlier, making Gᴇᴜ excited until Paracelsus declined the offer without hesitation. Gᴇᴜ furrowed his eyebrows in confusion, and asked if Paracelsus knew what he was saying, wondering if the monocle-wearing male intended to make ready for the monster wave without aid. Nox watched in the distance as Paracelsus explained that his intention was proceeding as previously planned, but he wished Gᴇᴜ fortune in his campaign. Gᴇᴜ called Paracelsus a commoner. However, this only made the mercenary chuckle, as he had been subject to far unkinder remarks as a vagabond. Again, Paracelsus still wished Gᴇᴜ luck in navigating through all the challenges, so Nox believed that this was the end of their interactions, and wondered if their paths would cross again in the future. Night arrived, and Nox told Dzītrī to get a good rest, as they were going to be busy the next day. Going into his bedroom only to notice the girl from earlier outside, sitting near a fire with other children. The girl jerked up in surprise when her attention was called for, as Nox asked if she was not in search of food, making all the kids stare at Nox with surprise as he pulled out a bag filled with loaves of bread. He handed the bread to the children, making the girl choke up with tears of happiness. Nox knew that he couldn't save everyone, and this action was just him acting out of what little goodwill his otherworld self used to have. But the children were still joyful from this kind action as they dug into their food, something that Nox didn't want them to beg for anymore. Along with that, Nox and the others needed to find ways to survive in this town. In the distance, it seemed as though Dzītrī was watching what Nox was doing, smiling softly at the fact that the boy had just assumed a cold demeanor earlier. The next day, Tᴇʀᴛ was explaining to the others how every year the south of Tᴇʴ�̈s was plagued by the surge of monsters frequently. In their efforts to fend it off, the town had nowhere to turn but the subsidy and support from the king. As they stepped through the area, Gᴇᴜ asked if the palisade served as the sole defense of the town, to which Tᴇʀᴛ affirmed, even though it all required some mending to be done. Nox glanced at the walls and sighed at the sight of them, knowing that the whole town would be slaughtered within an hour once the wave started pushing in. This campaign was merely a sub-episode in the game, and Nox could choose whether to save the town or not. But so far, he had always chosen to save it. Why, you ask? Because the town becomes extremely valuable, since Tᴇʴ�̈s later becomes one of the most profitable lands of the Empire. Tᴇʀᴛ continued to talk to the noble boys and explained that this year, monsters were proliferating at a disquieting rate, which was unlike what they had already seen. Nox realized that these people had no idea how that unusual surge would end up helping in this land, but that was for future them to figure out. There were townspeople who had reported having glimpsed a griffin, causing everyone to freeze and Gᴇᴜ to hum in thought, and ask where it was seen. Blocking the advance of that griffin was crucial for the success of the campaign, since such creatures were known as the kings of the wasteland, and at least in this game, were meant to be warded off and certainly not hunted. Despite that though, Nox's plan was to hunt it. Everyone stared off at the wasteland they saw, as Tᴇʀᴛ explained that it was a neutral territory, serving as their border with the Tahalin. Nox finally spoke up, and wondered if anyone wasn't curious, since the known habitats of griffins didn't even adjoin the towns of Tᴇʴ�̈s. So he asked if they were not known to inhabit Tahalin for the most part, wondering why their presence was near Tᴇʴ�̈s in the first place. A chilling aura came upon the men, as Nox knew that reaction answered his question on who would prove to be the traitor and would be the signal of the beginning of a sub-quest. The first thing that Nox was going to do was scrape off the festering rot of the town. Later in the day, Schultz was seen crumpling up some papers in anger, since he felt as though Nox was beginning to become a large wall in his plans, since Nox's scheme had caused Schultz to lose Gᴇᴜn's favor. He grit his teeth in a rage, since he spent all his time wasted after fawning over Gᴇᴜn to win his favor, but his angry thoughts were interrupted when he heard Tᴇʀᴜ walking down the stairs of the inn. Schultz remembered that the girl was Nox's servant and a commoner, so he immediately thought up of a plan. He slammed his hand against the wall next to her. He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward him, making her confused and ask what he was intending to do. The male said that was obvious, and that they should find a place for the conversation, but Tᴇʀᴜ pulled her hand away and tried to retreat. However, Schultz continued his advances, and said that he, as a knight on a mission, still needed amusement, and asked Tᴇʀᴜ if it was not the same for her. He grabbed her shoulder, and the green-haired girl was about to talk back until she realized that fighting against the man would have Nox end up on the wrong side of Gᴇᴜn, and expose him to scorns of all sorts within his family, so she decided to just let things happen in order to try to protect Nox. Schultz said that she, as Nox's servant, shall pay the price for Nox's actions. However, the voice of Nox was heard as he said that he was more than willing to pay it himself. The sounds of slashing were heard, and Tᴇʀᴜ stared with surprise at Nox holding a bloody blade. The boy staring coldly at Schultz, while telling him to name the price he would have Nox render for Schultz's failed efforts. The male was confused, and said that Nox would not get away with what he did for maiming Gᴇᴜn's knight, but Nox didn't care, and slashed off Schultz's other arm, which caused him to scream even more from the pain. Schultz asked if Nox believed he could take refuge behind his family name, but his words were interrupted by Nox mentioning that the one who was trying to hide behind Alienhaber's name was Schultz himself. The male's last moments were looking at the blade from Nox, that was then plunged into Schultz's back, killing him. Tᴇʀᴜ was worried for what would happen to Nox because of his actions, but the answer would soon be found, as Gᴇᴜn walked into the inn and asked if he killed Schultz. The boy was immediate with his response, which caused Gᴇᴜn to shout at the younger brother, but Nox asked if it would be fair to inquire about what happened instead of yelling. Gᴇᴜn grabbed Nox's collar and demanded the reason with a threat, to which Nox gave a simple answer that Schultz had attempted to violate his aid, and that he didn't want to stand idly and let him. This answer did not satisfy Gᴇᴜn, but Nox asked if Gᴇᴜn was sure of his priorities, suspending an amount of power from his body to show intimidation. Gᴇᴜn was shocked by the sight of what Nox was capable of, in disbelief at the power he now possessed compared to before. Nox's brother said the boy could have at least reported to him before anything, but Nox interrupted, and reminded how he was known as the family wretch, and how reporting and waiting were not his strong suits. With that, Nox suggested that judgment should be deferred, and that they should let their father render the final decision. Gᴇᴜn gulped nervously, and agreed reluctantly, making Nox grin before telling Tᴇʀᴜ it was time to go, after which they left promptly. The older brother would stand there, wondering how long Nox had been like this and why the sword was so familiar, but Gᴇᴜn knew that he must no longer make light of the boy. Nox knew that there would now be commotion among the soldiers, since they were already split into factions and were at a crossroads where they would have to make a decision, wondering if they would follow Gᴇᴜn or Nox. He glanced over at Tᴇʀᴜ asking if she was alright, but she asked the same question back, wondering why he protected her when it would likely make the matter worse. Nox asked if the green-haired girl knew what kind of person the master she served was, reminding her that he was the good-for-nothing of the Lienhabe family. He explained to her that no matter where they were, she should never bow her head, to which she felt touched by his words and agreed to. In the inn, Gᴇᴜn slammed his mug onto the table in anger at how Nox went from being a troublesome task to a completely different person, along with the fact that the sword that Nox wielded looked similar to their father's sword. Gᴇᴜn wanted to be wary of the boy since Schultz was now gone, but his thoughts were interrupted by the other male from earlier walking into the room to report the mess taken care of, along with agreeing that Nox was different than the rumors. Not only was Nox different, but Gᴇᴜn believed that this man was different too, since he was supposed to be the captain of the night order that had been operating around the place, which confused Gᴇᴜn, since Nox knew the place better for some reason. Since the monster wave hadn't started, Gᴇᴜn was going to make use of the night order a little more, ordering the man to get rid of all of the bandits and monsters in the vicinity and to immediately report anything happening with Nox. The man agreed and promptly left, while Nox was still outside with Tᴇʀᴜ, inspecting some vials as Tᴇʀᴜ asked if he looked around the walls. He affirmed, and the green-haired girl asked how they would stop the wave, to which Nox walked somewhere with the girl in tow. Nox said that he was thinking of recruiting someone new, because he knew there was a genius in this small village, a woman named Alina, a character that Nox would recruit every time he came to Chaders, a genius potion maker and also Nox's potion shuttle. He walked through the alleyways, as Tᴇʀᴜ asked if a genius potion maker really existed in such a place, to which Nox affirmed, and explained she had her own reasons for staying in such a place, that reason being that this is the hidden route to clear Tᴇʴɪrs. In the future, Alina would be working for another instead of the Archive Empire, so if one doesn't clear Tᴇʴɪrs with the hidden route, they could never get Alina. They continued down as Nox seemed to know where he was going, and Tᴇʀᴜ noticed a light, pointing at it and walking into the building to witness a drunk woman peering at them and Nox greeting her. The woman screamed in surprise at the presence of other people, and Tᴇʀᴜ was in disbelief that the genius potion maker was a drunkard. After calming down a bit, Alina apologized for her behavior, and Nox said they needed to talk. Nox thought about Alina's character at this point of the story and had to get her into the party even despite her flaws, observing the stats and reading that her only negative trait was being a drunkard. He sighed and knew that the Lienhaber family was unlikely to recruit such genius characters. Nox said that they didn't have a choice, and Tᴇʀᴜ tried to say it was unwise to recruit drunkards. Nox agreed, but said it was complicated. Alina asked why they came, and Nox got straight to the point, wanting Alina to join his team in exchange for giving her what she needed most. She didn't know what he was talking about and tried to decline, but Nox knew that her reasons were related to her friend, May, surprising her with his knowledge. Nox immediately explained that May would be executed in the near future, shocking the woman even more, as Nox said things could possibly change if she accepted his offer. So he asked one more time, wanting to know if he changed her mind a little. Alina thought back on the words that Nox said, feeling conflicted on the offer and the situation regarding her friend. May was the person who would talk back against the knights for their decisions, such as raising tax, and May was also Alina's one and only friend. She would tell Tᴇʀᴛ and his men that they weren't doing anything for the town, despite being sent funds, but the male only glared down at her before eventually dragging May away. Alina wished that it was her who was dragged away after reacting aggressively, tearing up at her weak attitude to rescue her own friend, and believing that Nox wouldn't save the ginger-haired girl either. Either way, she didn't think that she would be able to forget this situation for a long time, a very long time. At a tavern, the men that Grian hired were all drinking the night away and laughing about how he was an idiot. They had been pretending to act like a knight order, and Grian seemed to believe without suspicion. Everyone laughed, and one of the men said it was worth ransacking the Ron Knight Order's living place, getting the badge that could get them even bigger jobs. If they showed it to the Lienhaber family as well, they believed that they would get the benefits befitting someone of the position of the captain of Ron Knight Order, along with things being even better, since the names were the same as the main guy. Ron said that if they held Grian as hostage, they could get a big payout. They continued to laugh as another guy spoke up and wondered if their actions would be alright, since they were dealing with the most influential family of the Dark Three, but the others glared at the male and called him a coward and an idiot. He shied away and Ron stopped everyone's anger, as he got up and rhetorically asked if he knew where they were, explaining that they were in a town that even the Imperial family had given up on. Ron suggested that they should simply hold Grian hostage and get the money before running off, since he believed that no matter how influential the Lienhaber family was, they wouldn't be able to do anything in an enemy nation surrounded by sand. They continued their chatting, but one guy said that Nox was with them as well, and Ron agreed that the boy was dangerous and said they shouldn't get involved until they finished things up. Another guy said that there was no concern since Nox was just a kid, so they all continued to laugh and drink once again, until the candles suddenly went out. Everyone was confused and started to get agitated, to which Ron told everyone to calm down, until he felt blood on him, which confused him. He glanced over and noticed someone had been decapitated and heard the screams of others, confusing Ron even more, as he walked over to see another dead body. Ron realized that there were enemies, and shouted for them to reveal themselves, to which Nox stood behind him with a cold glare, calling them all vermin before Ron would jump back. Nox was surprised about their hidden place, and asked why they had the audacity to rob the Lienhaber family and overestimate themselves. Ron said that Nox was mistaken, but Nox interrupted him, and already knew about their crimes together with Tᴇʀᴛ and how they wanted to use Grian. The male grit his teeth and asked what Nox wanted, saying that all he needed to do was just to look away this one time. The men started to surround Nox, threatening the boy, while Nox activated his sword and spun around to slice multiple men, asking Ron if there was anyone naive enough to believe that. Ron ordered everyone to get the boy, to which everyone charged at Nox, but he easily dodged everyone's attacks and swiftly killed them. Ron watched in the distance, believing that Nox had been hiding these skills the whole time, so the male grabbed the blade and activated some power, telling Nox to remember that he was dying because of his arrogance. The others believed that Ron would win, as the man used his southern sword technique, but Nox wasn't alarmed, as he simply sliced through the attack and destroyed it with his genius swordsman trait. Everyone was shocked by this action, and Nox killed the stray men lying around, calling them vermin once again, as Nox asked why they had the audacity to ask Nox what he wanted, when he had already gotten exactly what he wanted, proceeding to activate the same technique that Ron had. After Nox had activated the technique of Ron and destroyed the attack, the boy pulled out his blade and prepared the Southern Sword technique. During this, Nox thought about geniuses and what it meant to be one. He felt himself standing in the middle of a vast, white space in white clothes, continuing to wonder if being a genius just meant that one was more exceptional than other people. He stepped forward and ended up at what seemed to be some sort of mirror. If being a genius wasn't being more exceptional, then did it mean someone who had proven they could reach a higher level that most people couldn't reach? The mirror shattered, and Nox felt as though from the moment he had risked his life, Nox asked himself that question repeatedly. What does it mean to be a genius? With a smile, Nox came back into reality. He knew that the sword technique that he was using at the moment wouldn't be much compared to the sword techniques he would be learning in the future, but it would definitely be enough against his enemies. All of the other bandits got slashed from how wide the attack was, as Ron could only collapse to the ground in despair from his plans being foiled so easily. Chater's Southern Sword technique was something that took Ron more than 10 years of his life to master, and now a kid like Nox somehow figured it out within seconds. Nox stepped on the blade that Ron wielded, looking down at the male with a cold glare. The brown-haired male snapped out of his bewilderment and shouted, jumping back while trying to threaten that Tᴇʀᴛ wouldn't let Nox get away with things if Nox killed Ron, or that Tᴇʀᴛ may have already heard what Nox had done. None of these threats fazed Nox, as he simply said there weren't any witnesses, cutting off Ron by explaining that he was simply assassinating them. Ron was still confused by this, so the boy put a finger to his mouth in a way of hushing Ron, as Nox explained that if no one lived to tell the tale, this would only look like an assassination. The boy held a smile on his face, knowing what the world would think, before Nox would slash and kill Ron. Somewhere in a dungeon, May was being held as a prisoner and was chained to the brick walls while huffing to herself. Tᴇʀᴛ was talking to her, and learned that she didn't want to work nor be sold off to the other nobles. But the girl didn't speak at first, so the male slapped May in the face to get her to talk. She only grinned and said that she wouldn't listen to the likes of him, causing him to grab her face, and claimed there was nothing she could do at that moment. He told her that the only thing that someone as lowly as her could do was struggle on the ground. But suddenly, she spat at him. Tᴇʀᴛ paused for a moment and asked her what she was doing before slapping her again, wondering if she wanted to be sold to a black mage. May had thought back to her past, and how a teacher was telling her how she had gotten the potion mixture wrong despite trying her best, meaning she was likely not cut out for the subject. The girl had seemingly zero talents from the start, not in alchemy, nor in swordsmanship, or anything else. The teacher was excited when she got to Alina's potion, and felt as though she had nothing else to teach the girl, continuing to praise the half-elf girl as May felt almost jealous. May overheard the teacher sighing about how Alina was a war orphan, but was from a noble family and had a chance to at least get out of the orphanage. Alina was an alchemy genius, and seemed like someone who didn't belong in a place like the orphanage from the start. The half-elf girl always had a sparkle around her, but despite that, she would always try to play with May and had that bright smile that caused the ginger-haired girl to be helplessly envious of Alina. That was why she had decided to sacrifice herself instead of Alina, because she was certain that Alina would accomplish way more than someone like May ever could. She told Tᴇʀᴛ that struggling on the ground was the norm her whole life, and that whatever he wanted to do to her after her death was none of her business. May didn't want to become Alina's burden, so she allowed herself to keep getting beaten by Tᴇʀᴛ until a voice rang through the room, telling May to stop trying to harm herself. Nox told the ginger-haired girl that if she made it out of this place as a corpse, Alina would be sad. The boy and his blade walked down the hall and Tᴇʀᴛ asked what brought him there, to which Nox said, by the law of the imperial family, he was going to execute the male. Nox mentioned to Tᴇʀᴛ that his partner Ron was already dead, so it would be best for the male to give up right now. Tᴇʀᴛ hummed in thought and glanced over at Nox, asking if the boy came here alone, to which Nox affirmed immediately without any hesitation. With that, Tᴇʀᴛ grinned, and said that the young master of a noble family had underestimated him too much, and asked if Nox thought he could defeat Tᴇʀᴛ alone. That was another question that Nox affirmed, grinning as well, as Tᴇʀᴛ proceeded to take out his blade with a frown. Other knights started to flood the room, trying to seemingly surround Nox and block the way to the cage, as Tᴇʀᴛ ordered them to kill Nox. Shouts were heard from all of the men who charged forward at the light-haired boy, who stared forward without alarm, closing his eyes and taking a breath before he would activate his time-slowing ability. Everything started to slow down, almost as if everything was frozen in time, and the 5-minute time limit started. But this wouldn't be a problem for Nox. The boy would walk past all of the knights, slashing them along the way without a care in the world, as he held his bloody blade and entered the prison cell where Tᴇʀᴛ and Mei were. He walked past Tᴇʀᴛ as well, and glanced at the man's face as the clock kept ticking, and ended up next to where Mei was, reaching out his hand to touch her face. The ability was still activated, but he slowed himself down to get back into reality in order to pour something on Mei, as she asked who he was. Nox immediately gave his name as her vision became blurry, to which he told her that everything would be over after she woke up from her sleep. The girl was lulled into an unconscious state, likely from whatever Nox poured on her, and Tᴇʀᴛ turned around with shock at the fact that Nox had seemingly already defeated his men, and was already in the prison cell. As Tᴇʀᴛ turned around, he was unable to notice that Nox had done something to him, causing him to tip over and collapse onto the rocky ground. As he struggled to get up, he turned to see that his feet were sliced off, confusing him greatly, since he didn't see this happen at all, causing all of the knights to scream from the pain, as their blood spilled onto the walls of the dungeon. Nox walked up to Tᴇʀᴛ and told him that he shouldn't think that he would die that easily, to which Tᴇʀᴛ stared up at Nox with a bewildered expression and a chill down his spine. He couldn't believe what was happening, and the fact that he, the great Tᴇʀᴛ, had lost to a mere child. The boy stared coldly down at Tᴇʀᴛ as Nox wondered once again what it meant to be a genius at that moment. He aimed his blade at Tᴇʀᴛ, pausing for a moment, before he thought that it was Nox, the character, who was a genius. Bringing the sword into the air, the boy wondered what being a genius meant to the character, before proceeding to stab and kill Tᴇʀᴛ. In that moment, Tᴇʀᴛ couldn't help but see his life flash before his eyes. When Tᴇʀᴛ was younger, his father was the knight captain of the Tᴇʀᴜs mercenary corps. That man was supposedly the most outstanding person within the village to everyone, including Tᴇʀᴛ. Every man wanted to be like Tᴇʀᴛ's father, but it seemed as though Tᴇʀᴛ saw a different story of his father behind closed doors, even if people respected this man in the public eye. As Tᴇʀᴛ's father would hold his mother's hair with his bloodied hand after beating her, the older male would ask his son if he knew the reason why people in town followed him. The boy looked away and said he didn't know the reason, so Tᴇʀᴛ's father put a hand on Tᴇʀᴛ's head, saying the answer was strength. He explained that possessing overwhelming strength can make a person get away with anything, and that was the law of a city on the borders of the Archaim Empire. Tᴇʀᴛ asked his father if he was the strongest person on the continent, causing his father to pause for a moment, before letting go of both his son and wife, while admitting he wasn't the strongest on the continent. He said that he was just one of the countless nobodies, and that there were numerous unbelievably strong swordsmen on the continent, and also kids that were Tᴇʀᴛ's age who were geniuses, who were stronger than Tᴇʀᴛ's father. Tᴇʀᴛ's father told him that was what it was like for a continent experiencing war. Back in reality, Tᴇʀᴛ knew that the reason he had survived for so long was because he chose not to fight with these geniuses, and as he saw Nox raising the blade that would lead to Tᴇʀᴛ's doom, the male repeated Nox's name in his head. Tᴇʀᴛ believed that Nox was one of the unreachable geniuses that his father mentioned, believing that being a genius was to be so talented that no one could reach them. Because of this, Tᴇʀᴛ let out a sigh with fear in his eyes, as he spoke his last words, saying that the only reason he was dying right now was because he chose to fight with Nox, a supposed genius in his eyes. With that, the blade plunged through Tᴇʀᴛ's back, and Nox had finally killed him. Meanwhile, Alina was sitting in her chair in her place of hiding, seemingly in a fetal position with her knees to her chest. She had a depressed expression on her face due to her lack of hope of Mei ever coming back. But her attention was called for when someone said Alina's name. As the half-elf girl turned her head, she saw her friend walking into the building with a Zitri by her side. Alina was struck with shock and disbelief at Mei's presence, and Alina tackled the ginger-haired girl with a hug, crying heavily, saying that she was so scared. She thought that Mei had really left her. Mei reassured Alina and apologized for her actions in making Alina think that way, believing that Mei herself was the selfish one to think that she had wanted to do things alone while leaving Alina behind. Zitri smiled at the heartwarming sight, and Alina pulled away from the hug to ask where Nox was, to which the green-haired girl explained that he was wrapping up the situation and talking right now. Alina was confused by the answer, as Zitri said that she believed that Nox was having a heart-to-heart conversation with his brother, but she knew that it didn't seem to be his true intention. As the night continued, Gᴇᴜs was tapping impatiently at the table, while wondering how long Ron was going to keep him, a noble from the Lianhaba family, waiting. A knock was heard and Gᴇᴜs wondered who it was, until he realized it was his little brother, to which Nox wanted Gᴇᴜ's availability to talk for a moment. Gᴇᴜs wanted to know why Nox thought he would want to talk to him, but Gᴇᴜs noticed the blood on Nox's shirt, which made the situation feel a little frightening to Gᴇᴜs, as Nox insisted it was an important matter. The brother decided to allow it and told Nox to take a seat, while meanwhile Rodwell was telling Theodore that they received a message that Nox had purged the corruption within Tᴇʴ̈rs, and that Nox requested a separate reward. Rodwell couldn't figure it out, so he gave the letter to Theodore, who remembered that Tᴇʴ̈rs was a place no one wanted to bother with due to how unprofitable it was, but it was also a huge headache for the imperial family, as letting it fall would have monsters go toward the center. The central government allocated a large amount of funds, troops, and also mercenary corps to defend relevant areas, so that was why it couldn't be totally abandoned. Tᴇʀᴜ believed that traitors didn't have any value, and agreed that all the bandit groups would be dangerous for even Gᴇირɪᴜs, and that the situation would likely turn for the worse if the Ron bandits attacked. If they couldn't overcome a situation of that level, they didn't deserve to be called part of the reincarnates family, which was why Tᴇʀᴜ placed the Black Sword Knights with them to prevent them from dying. Back to the topic with the Nox, Tᴇʀᴜ didn't believe that Nox had the generosity to purge corruption for nothing, so he was confused as to why he wanted authority over traitors. Nox's father read that Nox would even give up his right as the youngest son of the reincarnates family if he failed to profit, and Rodwell asked if Tᴇʀᴜ was going to reject the proposal. Tᴇʀᴜ decided he would accept it, and even obtain the jurisdiction of the area, believing that this was a good opportunity to see how good Nox was at managing a territory. Rodwell understood, and would send a letter to the Empire to start the talks, proceeding to leave as Tᴇʀᴜ read over his son's name, and wondered how far ahead the boy was planning. Birds flew over the inn on a bright morning, as Gᴇირɪᴜs learned that Ron and Tᴇʀᴏ wanted to kill him, and that he was their underling. Gᴇირɪᴜs felt upset with the whole situation and how he fell for their schemes, feeling offended that these men tried to leech off of him by tricking the reincarnates family. Even so, the male looked up at Nox, believing that he was more of a bother, to which Nox asked if his brother was scared of him. Gᴇირɪᴜs felt angry by this response, but decided to hold back for now, since he wouldn't become a knight if he didn't pass the test, so he had to accept Nox's offer. With a sigh, Gᴇირɪᴜs asked the boy what he wanted, which made Nox amused, as he explained that all he wanted was the right to command all the soldiers under Gᴇირɪᴜs' command. Gᴇირɪᴜs knew that, as unfortunate as it was, his life was in Nox's hands, especially since he didn't know exactly how strong Nox was. In return for the command, Gᴇირɪᴜs wanted Nox to remember to guarantee his life and yield the outcome, to which Nox agreed, but said that was 2 requests, which meant another thing for Gᴇირɪᴜs to give in exchange. This caused the older brother to glare, as he said he would also hand over mineral rights and artifacts of his large mine. With that, Gᴇირɪᴜs insisted Nox would take care of things properly, to which the boy said that it would be an easy thing to do, getting up and saying that he would be in his brother's care while staying in Traitors, grinning and telling his brother that he hoped he wouldn't do anything rash. At Alina's place, Nox had asked Alina for some potions, and while they were ones she had never made before, she believed it was possible. Zitri believed it was a good answer, but she also believed that Nox's plan was too dangerous, and wondered why he needed to kill the Griffin. May also agreed, but Nox said they shouldn't be scared, as he wouldn't have brought it up if it was impossible. They were being reasonable with their worry, but he had to lie since he couldn't tell them about the thing he wanted to obtain. He decided to be vague about it, which Zitri complied with reluctantly, but Nox knew that killing the Griffin at the beginning of the game was actually close to impossible, since no one had succeeded in doing so. Well, at least that would be the case when trying to exclude Nox. The boy started to draw up the plan and remembered the hidden route, one that would make it possible to kill the Griffin as compared to the normal playstyle. It would only be revealed to so-called stagnant water gamers, something that Nox was since he had cleared the game 27 times. He asked if everyone understood, to which all the women affirmed. The reason why he wanted to kill the Griffin was because the reward was that great. With that, they would proceed with the plan the next day, and as the sun set, Nox would feed his horse. He knew that if he didn't put his life on the line, he couldn't survive, since that was the type of world he transmigrated to. The next day, it seemed as though a large swarm of monsters started to run through the woods, while Nox watched from above, telling everyone to get ready. Alina and May affirmed, and Gᴇირɪᴜs did as well, but with more annoyance on his expression. The boy turned to the soldiers and told them that they only had one chance, to which Nox wondered why the moment felt so new. The fact that he had become Nox and the only strategist. Zitri wondered if he would really be alright, and was about to say the words that she had said the previous day, but the boy reassured her that she could trust her master wouldn't die. As Nox jumped down from the wall, he wondered if it was from that moment, the moment when he made a promise he couldn't keep since he was terminally ill. The blade slowed his descent as Nox leapt off toward the monsters, throwing a potion at a golem which seemed to slow it down, and gave Nox the opportunity to slash through it. The system told him he had killed an iron golem, and increased his proficiency in the Traitors' southern sword technique. He continued slashing through all the monsters and knew that if he didn't have that promise, then he might actually die. All the monsters charged toward Nox, who believed that everyone becoming his stepping stones would make him enjoy the game more, the game that had become his reality. Within seconds, that was when Nox witnessed it, the presence of the Griffin, which made Nox wonder if it was time to get started.